In a bustling Starbucks, two worlds collide. Karen Whitman, a middle-aged white woman, sips her latte, her eyes fixed on Amara Johnson, a young black professional intensely focused on her laptop. Karen's suspicion grows with each passing moment, her prejudices bubbling to the surface. Unbeknownst to Karen, Amara is a highly skilled CIA agent in the middle of a critical operation. As Karen's discomfort escalates, she approaches the barista, voicing her unfounded concerns. Dissatisfied with the response, she makes a fateful decision that will change both their lives forever. She calls the police. The moment the officers arrive, tension crackles through the air. Amara, calm and composed, reveals her true identity, leaving Karen stunned and the onlookers shocked. In an instant, Karen's world unravels, her actions exposed for what they truly are, racial profiling. What follows is a gripping courtroom battle that will test both women's resolve. Karen faces the consequences of her prejudice, while Amara navigates the delicate balance between justice and national security. As the trial unfolds, hidden truths emerge, challenging everyone's perceptions and forcing a nation to confront its deep-seated biases. This story of prejudice, power, and redemption will keep you on the edge of your seat. Before we dive in, buckle up, get ready, and subscribe for a special surprise tomorrow. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air, mingling with the low hum of conversation and the gentle clatter of cups and saucers. Sunlight streamed through the large windows of the Starbucks, casting a warm glow over the diverse array of patrons scattered throughout the bustling cafe. It was a typical weekday morning in the affluent suburb of Oakwood, where professionals and stay-at-home parents alike sought their daily caffeine fix before tackling the day ahead. Among the crowd, seated at a small table near the window, was Karen Whitman. At 45, Karen exuded an air of confidence that came from years of comfort and privilege. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair framed a face that bore the subtle signs of regular spa treatments and Botox injections. She wore a crisp white blouse tucked into tailored beige slacks, her manicured fingers wrapped around a grande skinny vanilla latte. Karen's blue eyes scanned the room with the practiced nonchalance of someone accustomed to being aware of their surroundings. Her gaze briefly lingered on each face, cataloging and categorizing in the blink of an eye. It was a habit she'd developed over years of suburban living, a skill she prided herself on, even if she never openly admitted to it. As she took another sip of her latte, Karen's attention was drawn to a young woman who had just entered the cafe. Amara Johnson moved with a quiet confidence, her dark skin a stark contrast to the sea of predominantly white faces that filled the Starbucks. She was dressed in a sharp charcoal gray suit, her natural hair styled in neat professional twists. A sleek laptop bag was slung over her shoulder, and her eyes were focused on her smartphone as she made her way to the counter. Karen watched as Amara placed her order, noting the way the young woman's fingers flew over her phone screen even as she spoke to the barista. There was something about her demeanor that set Karen on edge, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. Perhaps it was the intensity in Amara's dark eyes, or the way she seemed hyper-aware of her surroundings despite appearing engrossed in her device. As Amara collected her drink a few minutes later, Karen's eyes followed her to a table in the corner of the cafe. The young woman set up her laptop with practiced efficiency, her movements quick and precise. Within moments, she was typing furiously, her gaze fixed on the screen with unwavering focus. Karen found herself unable to look away. There was something off about the situation, she thought. Why would someone come to a busy coffee shop to work on something that clearly required such concentration? And why did the young woman seem so out of place in this neighborhood? Pushing aside the nagging voice in her head that suggested her unease might be rooted in something less savory, Karen continued to observe Amara. She noticed how the young woman's eyes would occasionally dart up from her screen, scanning the room in a way that seemed almost practiced. It was as if she was looking for something or someone, Karen mused, her imagination beginning to run wild. As the minutes ticked by, Karen's suspicion grew. She watched as Amara took a sip of her coffee, never taking her eyes off the screen. The young woman's fingers moved across the keyboard, in bursts of activity, followed by moments of stillness where she appeared to be reading intently. Karen's mind raced with possibilities, each more outlandish than the last. Was she hacking into something, planning some sort of crime? The rational part of Karen's brain was probably just a hard-working professional on a tight deadline, but the seed of suspicion had been planted, and it was rapidly taking root. Karen glanced around the cafe, wondering if anyone else had noticed the strange behavior, but the other patrons seemed oblivious, caught up in their own conversations and devices. Even the staff behind the counter paid no attention to the focused young woman in the corner, feeling a sense of civic duty welling up inside. Karen decided she needed to do something. She couldn't just sit idly by if there was a potential threat in their midst. After all, this was her neighborhood, her Starbucks. She had a responsibility to keep it safe. With a deep breath, Karen stood up, smoothing out her slacks as she did so. She walked purposefully towards the counter, her eyes never straying far from Amara's corner. As she approached the barista, a young man with a friendly smile, Karen leaned in close, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Excuse me," she began, her tone urgent but hushed. "I don't mean to alarm you, but I've noticed something concerning." The barista, whose name tag read Tyler, raised an eyebrow. "Is everything okay, ma'am? Is there a problem with your drink?" Karen shook her head, glancing over her shoulder at Amara before continuing. No, it's not that. It's just that woman over there." She nodded discreetly in Amara's direction. "Don't you think she's acting a bit suspicious?" Tyler's brow furrowed as he looked past Karen to where Amara sat, still engrossed in her work. "I'm not sure I understand, ma'am. She seems to be working on her laptop. Is she bothering you in some way?" "No, not exactly," Karen pressed on, frustration creeping into her voice. "But look at how intensely she's focused on that computer, and she keeps looking around the room like she's checking to see if anyone's watching her. Don't you think that's odd?" The young barista's expression shifted from confusion to discomfort. "Ma'am, I don't see anything unusual about a customer using our free Wi-Fi to work. It's actually quite common, especially during the morning rush." Karen felt a flash of annoyance at the barista's dismissal of her concerns. "But she doesn't look like she's from around here," she insisted, lowering her voice even further. "And in this day and age, you can never be too careful. What if she's up to something illegal?" Tyler's uncomfortable expression deepened, and he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but we can't make assumptions about our customers based on their appearance or behavior, as long as they're not disturbing anyone. The woman you're referring to is a regular customer and has never caused any problems." Karen's eyes widened at this information. A regular? How had she never noticed her before? The seed of suspicion in her mind grew larger, feeding on this new tidbit of information. If this woman was here often, engaged in such intense, secretive work, surely that was even more reason to be concerned. "I understand," Karen said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But I really think someone should keep an eye on her. It's better to be safe than sorry, don't you think?" Tyler's polite smile had become strained. "Ma'am, I assure you that if there were any real cause for concern, our staff would handle it appropriately. Now, is there anything else I can help you with today?" Realizing she wasn't going to get anywhere with the young barista, Karen shook her head. "No, thank you," she said curtly, turning on her heel and walking back to her table. As she sat down, her eyes once again found Amara, who remained oblivious to the scrutiny she was under. Karen's mind raced. If the staff wouldn't take her concerns seriously, what should she do? She couldn't just ignore her instincts. What if something terrible happened and she had done nothing to prevent it? The weight of imagined responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders. Taking out her phone, Karen pretended to scroll through her social media feed while surreptitiously snapping a few photos of Amara. She made sure to capture the young woman's face, her laptop, and the general area where she was sitting. Just in case, Karen thought to herself, trying to justify her actions. As the minutes ticked by, Karen's anxiety grew. She watched as Amara continued to work, her fingers flying over the keyboard with increasing urgency. Every now and then, the young woman would glance up, her eyes scanning the room before returning to her screen. To Karen, these looks seemed furtive and suspicious, further confirming her fears. The longer she watched, the more convinced Karen became that something was terribly wrong. Her imagination conjured images of terrorist plots, corporate espionage, and cyber attacks. Each scenario seemed more plausible than the last, fueled by years of sensational sensationalized news stories and a gate people who didn't fit her idea of what belonged in her neighborhood. Karen's heart raced as she weighed her options. She could leave, go home, and try to forget about what she'd seen. But what if something happened? She'd never forgive herself. She could try to approach Amara directly, but the thought of confronting someone she now perceived as a potential threat made her palms sweat. In the end, Karen made a decision that would change the course of not just her day, but her entire life. With trembling fingers, she pulled up the phone app on her smartphone. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, she dialed 911. As the phone rang, Karen's eyes remained fixed on Amara. The young woman was still absorbed in her work, completely unaware of the storm that was about to break over her head. For a brief moment, doubt flickered in Karen's mind. Was she doing the right thing? But then the operator's voice came over the line, calm and professional. 911, what's your emergency? And with those words, Karen Whitman set in motion a chain of events that would expose the deep-seated biases lurking beneath the surface of their seemingly peaceful community. Little did she know that her actions were about to shine a spotlight, not just on Amara Johnson, but on herself and the society that had shaped her perceptions. Yes, hello, Karen began, her voice low and urgent. I'm at the Starbucks on Oak Street, and there's a suspicious person here. I think she might be planning something dangerous. As Karen continued to relay her unfounded suspicions to the 911, operator Amara Johnson remained focused on her laptop, unaware that her world was about to be turned upside down. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows of the Starbucks, illuminating a scene that was about to become a battleground in the ongoing struggle against racial bias and prejudice in America. As Karen Whitman spoke in hushed tones to the 911 operator, her eyes remained fixed on Amara Johnson. The young woman continued to work diligently, oblivious to the storm brewing around her. Karen's heart raced as she relayed her suspicions, her imagination running wild with each passing second. Ma'am, the operator's voice crackled through the phone. Can you describe the suspicious behavior you're witnessing? Karen swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how flimsy her concerns might sound when voiced aloud. Well, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. There's this woman, she's not from around here, and she's been working on her laptop for over an hour now. She keeps looking around nervously, like she's afraid of being caught. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Is she doing anything illegal or threatening anyone? Karen felt a flicker of doubt, but quickly pushed it aside. No, not exactly, but she just looks so out of place. And in this day and age, you can never be too careful, right? The operator's tone remained neutral. Ma'am, we take all calls seriously, but we need to prioritize immediate threats. Has this woman made any threatening gestures or statements? No, Karen admitted reluctantly, but she's been typing furiously on her computer. Who knows what she could be planning? I understand your concern, the operator replied, but working on a laptop in a public place isn't illegal. Unless you witness any actual criminal activity, this isn't something the police can respond to. Karen felt a surge of frustration. Why couldn't they understand the potential danger? But what if she's planning something? What if she's a terrorist or a hacker? Ma'am, the operator's voice took on a firmer tone. We cannot dispatch officers based on speculation. If you witness any actual crime or threat, please call us back immediately. Otherwise, I must advise you not to approach or confront this individual yourself. With that, the call ended, leaving Karen feeling both deflated and increasingly agitated. She stared at her phone in disbelief, then looked back at Amara, who remained engrossed in her work. The cafe around them continued its morning bustle, patrons coming and going, the hiss of the espresso machine punctuating the low hum of conversation. Karen felt isolated in her bubble of suspicion, unable to understand why no one else seemed concerned. She watched as Amara took another sip of her coffee, her eyes never leaving the screen. The young woman's fingers flew across the keyboard in rapid bursts, followed by periods of intense focus where she appeared to be reading something on the screen. Karen's mind raced with possibilities. What if Amara was communicating with other conspirators? What if she was hacking into government systems or planning some sort of attack? The rational part of Karen's brain tried to interject, suggesting that Amara was probably just a hard-working professional on a tight deadline. But the seed of suspicion had taken root, and it was rapidly growing into an unshakable conviction. Karen stood up and made made her way back to the counter. The young barista, Tyler, looked up as she approached, a flicker of wariness crossing his face. "Excuse me," Karen said, leaning in close. "I just wanted to let you know that I've called the police about that woman." She nodded discreetly towards Amara. Tyler's eyes widened in alarm. "You did what?" he hissed, keeping his voice low to avoid drawing attention. "I called 911, Karen repeated, a note of pride in her voice. "Someone needed to do something." The color drained from Tyler's face. "Ma'am, I told you earlier that she's a regular customer. She's never caused any problems. Why would you do that?" Karen felt a flash of irritation at the young man's tone. "Better safe than sorry," she insisted. "If she's innocent, she has nothing to worry about." Tyler ran a hand through his hair, clearly distressed. "Ma'am, you can't just call the police on someone for using a laptop in a coffee shop. That's not okay." "Well, the police didn't seem to think it was serious enough to send someone," Karen admitted grudgingly. "But I still think someone should keep an eye on her." Tyler's expression hardened. "With all due respect, ma'am, it's not your job to monitor our customers. If you're uncomfortable, you're welcome to leave, but I'm going to have to ask you to stop harassing other patrons." Karen gasped, taken aback by the young man's sudden assertiveness. "Harassing? I'm trying to keep this place safe." "Ma'am, please lower your voice," Tyler said, glancing around nervously. "You're making a scene." Indeed, a few nearby customers had turned to look at them, curiosity and concern evident on their faces. Karen felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and anger. "Fine," she snapped, turning on her heel. "Don't say I didn't warn you when something happens." As Karen stormed back to her table, she noticed that Amara had finally looked up from her laptop. The young woman's dark eyes met Karen's for a brief moment, a mixture of confusion and wariness in her gaze. Karen quickly looked away, her heart pounding. Sitting down, Karen tried to calm herself. She took a sip of her now cold latte, grimacing at the taste. Her eyes kept darting back to Amara, who had returned her attention to her laptop, but seemed more tense than before. Karen's phone buzzed with a notification, momentarily distracting her. It was a reminder about a neighborhood watch meeting scheduled for that evening. Suddenly, an idea struck her. If the police wouldn't take her seriously, maybe her neighbors, they would. With renewed purpose, Karen opened her messaging app and began composing a group text to her fellow neighborhood watch members. Her fingers flew across the screen as she detailed her suspicions, embellishing here and there to emphasize the potential threat. "Suspicious individual at Oaks and Starbucks," she typed. "Young African-American woman, been here for hours on laptop, keeps looking around nervously. Possible security threat. Police notified but haven't responded. Should we take action?" She hesitated for a moment before hitting send, a small voice in the back of her mind questioning whether she was overreacting. But then she looked up at Amara again, saw the intensity with which the young woman was working, and all doubts vanished. She pressed send. Within moments, her phone began buzzing with responses. Some of her neighbors shared her concerns, while others urged caution and suggested leaving it to the authorities. The discussion quickly heated up, with various members chiming in with their own experiences and opinions. As Karen engaged in the digital debate, she failed to notice that Amara had packed up her things and was preparing to leave. It wasn't until she heard the bell above the door chime that Karen looked up, just in time to see Amara stepping out onto the sidewalk. Panic surged through Karen. She couldn't let Amara just walk away, not when she was convinced the young woman was up to something nefarious. Without thinking, she grabbed her purse and hurried after her, leaving her half-finished latte on the table. Outside, the morning sun had risen higher, casting short shadows on the tree-lined street. Karen spotted Amara a little way down the block, walking briskly with her laptop bag slung over her shoulder. Taking a deep breath, Karen set off in pursuit, trying to look casual as she followed at a distance. As they walked, Karen's mind raced with possibilities. Where was Amara going? Was she meeting someone, heading to another location to carry out whatever plan she had been working on? Karen was so caught up in her speculations that she almost didn't notice when Amara suddenly stopped and turned around. Their eyes met, and Karen froze, caught off guard. Amara's expression was a mixture of confusion and annoyance as she addressed Karen directly for the first time. "Excuse me," Amara said, her voice clear and composed, "but are you following me?" Her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't planned for this confrontation. I was just heading this way," she stammered, gesturing vaguely down the street. Amara's eyes narrowed, clearly not buying the excuse. "You've been watching me all morning in the coffee shop, and now you're following me. Why?" The direct question caught Karen off guard. She fumbled for a response, her mind racing to find a plausible explanation explanation that wouldn't reveal her true suspicions. I was just concerned, she managed to say, her voice shaky. You seemed very intense about whatever you were working on. Amara's expression shifted from annoyance to disbelief. So you decided to follow me because I was working intently on my laptop in a coffee shop. Do you realize how that sounds? Karen felt a surge of defensiveness. Well, in this day and age, you can never be too careful. I was just trying to be a good citizen. A good citizen, Amara repeated, her tone incredulous. By profiling and stalking a stranger, the accusation hit Karen like a slap in the face. I wasn't profiling anyone, she protested, her voice rising. I was just being cautious. You have to admit, you don't exactly look like you're from around here. As soon as the words left her mouth, Karen realized her mistake. Amara's eyes widened, then narrowed dangerously. And what exactly is that supposed to mean? She asked, her voice low and controlled. Karen fumbled for words, suddenly aware of how her statement sounded. I just meant this is a quiet neighborhood, and you're clearly a busy professional. It's unusual to see someone working so intensely in a coffee shop here. So, because I'm black and working hard, I must be up to something suspicious? Amara's voice was sharp, cutting through Karen's feeble excuses. Do you follow every person who doesn't fit your idea of who belongs in this neighborhood? No, of course not, Karen protested, feeling increasingly flustered. It's not about race. It's about behavior. You were acting suspiciously. Amara took a deep breath, visibly trying to calm herself. Ma'am, I am a professional woman doing my job. The fact that you find that suspicious says more about you than it does about me. Karen felt a mix of shame and indignation rising within her. Part of her knew she had crossed a line, but another part refused to back down. I was just trying to keep our community safe, she insisted. If you have nothing to hide, why are you so defensive? Because I shouldn't have to justify my existence to strangers, Amara snapped, her composure finally cracking. I shouldn't have to explain why I'm in a coffee shop, or why I'm working hard, or why I'm in this neighborhood. I have every right to exist in public spaces without being harassed or followed. The commotion had drawn the attention of passers-by. A small crowd had begun to gather, some people pulling out their phones to record the confrontation. Karen suddenly felt very exposed, aware of the judgmental looks being cast her way. I think you're overreacting, Karen said weakly, looking around nervously. I was just trying to be vigilant. No, Amara said firmly. You were racially profiling me and then stalking me when I left the coffee shop. That's not vigilance, it's harassment. A man in the gathering crowd spoke up. Is everything okay here? Do you need help, miss? He asked, addressing Amara. Amara shook her head, maintaining her composure. No, thank you. I can handle this. She turned back to Karen. I strongly suggest you go home and think about why you felt it necessary to follow and confront a stranger based on nothing more than your own prejudices. Karen felt her world spinning. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was the one who was supposed to be protecting the community, not being called out as the threat. I didn't mean any harm, she stammered. Intent doesn't negate impact, Amara replied coolly. Your actions were harmful, regardless of your intentions. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do, and I'd appreciate it if you stopped following me. With that, Amara turned and walked away, leaving Karen standing on the sidewalk, surrounded by curious and disapproving onlookers. As the crowd began to disperse, Karen heard snippets of conversation, most of it critical of her actions. Feeling humiliated and confused, Karen turned and hurried back towards the Starbucks, her mind reeling from the confrontation. As she walked, her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from her neighborhood watch group asking for updates and offering conflicting advice. Karen ignored the messages, her thoughts in turmoil. Had she really overreacted? Was she wrong to be suspicious? Or was Amara just very good at deflecting attention from her true activities? The seed of doubt had been planted, but Karen's convictions ran deep. As she approached the Starbucks, Karen saw two police cruisers pulling up to the curb. Her heart had been taken seriously after all, but as she got closer, she realized with a sinking feeling that the officers weren't there to investigate Amara. One of the officers, a stern-looking woman, approached Karen as she neared the coffee shop. Excuse me, ma'am, the officer said. Are you Karen Whitman? Karen nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. Yes, that's me. Is there a problem, officer? The policewoman's expression was grave. We've received multiple calls about a disturbance involving you, ma'am. I'm going to need you to come with us to answer some questions. As Karen was led to the police cruiser, she caught sight of Tyler, the barista, watching from the Starbucks doorway. His expression was a mixture of concern and vindication. Karen felt a wave of anger and betrayal wash over her. How had she become the villain in this scenario? As she sat in the back of the police car, Karen's mind raced. She had only been trying to protect her community, to be a good citizen. How had everything gone so wrong? And what would happen now? The police cruiser pulled away from the curb, carrying Karen towards an uncertain future. As the familiar streets of her neighborhood slipped by outside the window, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that her world had just been turned upside down. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, she had made a terrible mistake. The police station was a hive of activity as Karen Whitman was led through its doors. The harsh fluorescent lighting made her squint, accentuating the lines of worry etched across her face. Officers bustled about, phones rang incessantly, and the air was thick with tension and the acrid smell of stale coffee. Detective Sarah Martinez, a veteran of the force with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, watched as Karen was escorted to an interview room. She had been briefed on the situation, a case of potential racial profiling that had escalated into a public disturbance. It wasn't the first time she'd dealt with such an incident, but each one left a bitter taste in her mouth. As Karen settled into the hard plastic chair across from her, Detective Martinez studied the woman before her. Karen's perfectly manicured, nails drummed nervously on the table, her designer blouse slightly wrinkled from the morning's events. The detective noted the mix of indignation and fear in Karen's eyes, a common combination in cases like these. Mrs. Whitman, Detective Martinez began, her tone professional but firm. I'm Detective Sarah Martinez. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the events that transpired this morning at the Starbucks on Oak Street. Karen nodded, sitting up straighter in her chair. Of course, Detective. I want to cooperate fully. I was only trying to protect my community. Detective Martinez raised an eyebrow but kept her expression neutral. Let's start from the beginning. Can you tell me what first drew your attention to Ms. Johnson? Karen took a deep breath, her mind racing back to the coffee shop. Well, she just seemed out of place. She was working so intensely on her laptop, and she kept looking around like she was afraid of being caught. Out of place how exactly? The detective probed, her pen poised over her notepad. Karen hesitated, aware of how her words might sound. She just didn't look like she was from the neighborhood. And in this day and age, you can never be too careful, right? Detective Martinez's pen scratched across the paper. Mrs. Whitman, can you elaborate on what you mean by didn't look like she was from the neighborhood? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I just meant that she was dressed very professionally, like she worked in the city. Most people in our neighborhood are more casual, especially in the morning. I see, the detective said, her tone neutral. And this professional appearance, combined with her focus on her work, made you suspicious? Put that way, Karen's actions began to sound less reasonable, even to her own ears. Well, when you say it like that, it sounds silly, but there was just something off about the whole situation. Detective Martinez leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Whitman, I need you to be honest with me. Did Ms. Johnson's race play any part in your suspicions? The question hit Karen like a punch to the gut. She opened her mouth to deny it vehemently, but the words caught in her throat. Had race been a factor? She wanted to believe it hadn't, that she would have been just as suspicious of anyone behaving that way. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered doubts. I don't think so, Karen finally managed, her voice small. I'm not racist. I have black friends. I just wanted to keep everyone safe. The detective's expression remained impassive, but her eyes held a hint of something Karen couldn't quite read, disappointment, perhaps, or weariness. Having black friends doesn't preclude someone from holding racial biases. Can you walk me through your thought process that led you to call 911? Karen recounted her observations, her growing suspicions, and her frustration when the Starbucks staff didn't share her concerns. As she spoke, she became aware of how flimsy her justifications sounded. The detective listened attentively, occasionally asking for clarification or additional detail. After you called 911 and were told that no officers would be dispatched, why did you you decide to follow Ms. Johnson when she left the coffee shop?" Detective Martinez asked. Karen flushed, embarrassment and defensiveness warring within her. "I was worried she might be up to something. I thought if I could see where she was going, maybe I could prevent whatever she was planning." "And what made you think she was planning anything at all?" the detective pressed. "I don't know," Karen exclaimed, her frustration bubbling over. "It was just a feeling. I was trying to be a good citizen, to look out for my community. Is that so wrong?" Detective Martinez set down her pen and folded her hands on the table. "Mrs. Whitman, being a good citizen doesn't mean suspecting everyone who looks or acts differently from what you consider normal. It means respecting your fellow citizens' rights to exist in public spaces without harassment." The words hit Karen hard, echoing Amara's earlier statement. She felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "I didn't mean to harass anyone. I was just trying to help." "I understand that was your intention," the detective said, her tone softening slightly. "But intentions don't always align with impact. Your actions today caused distress to Ms. Johnson and created a public disturbance. There could be serious consequences." Karen's heart raced. "Consequences? Am I going to be arrested?" Detective Martinez shook her head. "At this point, that's not my decision to make. We'll need to speak with Ms. Johnson and gather more information, but I want you to understand the gravity of the situation. Racial profiling is a serious issue, Mrs. Whitman. It can have devastating effects on individuals and communities." As the weight of her actions began to sink in, Karen felt a wave of nausea wash over her. "What's going to happen now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "For now, we'll continue our investigation," the detective explained. "We'll be speaking with witnesses, including the staff at Starbucks and bystanders who saw your confrontation with Ms. Johnson. I strongly advise you to refrain from any further contact with Ms. Johnson or attempts to discuss this incident with others involved." Karen nodded numbly, her mind reeling. How had a simple trip to Starbucks turned into this nightmare? She thought of her husband, her children, her neighbors. What would they think when they found out? The carefully constructed image she had of herself as a pillar of the community was crumbling before her eyes. As Detective Martinez stood to conclude the interview, a commotion outside the room caught their attention. Raised voices could be heard, one of them hauntingly familiar to Karen. The detective excused herself and stepped out, leaving Karen alone with her tumultuous thoughts. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours to Karen as she sat in the sterile interview room. The muffled sounds of conversation outside occasionally rose in volume, only to be hushed again. Karen strained to make out words, to understand what was happening, but the thick door blocked most of the sound. Finally, the door opened and Detective Martinez returned, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood Amara Johnson, her expression a mixture of anger and determination. Karen felt her heart drop to her stomach. "Mrs. Whitman," Detective Martinez said, her tone carefully neutral. "Ms. Johnson has arrived to give her statement. She has also expressed a desire to speak with you directly under our supervision. Are you willing to have this conversation?" Karen's mouth went dry. She wanted to say no, to run away from this confrontation, but she knew that wasn't an option. Swallowing hard, she nodded. "Yes, I'm willing." Amara entered the room fully, her posture straight and confident despite the circumstances. She took the seat across from Karen, with Detective Martinez positioning herself at the end of the table, a silent observer and mediator. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Karen found herself unable to meet Amara's gaze, her eyes fixed on her own hands clasped tightly in her lap. It was Amara who finally broke the silence. "Mrs. Whitman," she began, her voice calm but with an undercurrent of steel. "I want you to understand exactly what you did today and the impact it had." Karen looked up, meeting Amara's eyes for the first time. The intensity she saw there made her want to look away again, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. "You saw a black woman, and your immediate assumption was that she must be doing something illegal or dangerous," Amara continued. "Do you have any idea how that feels? To know that no matter how hard I work, no matter how professionally I dress, no matter how law-abiding I am, there will always be people who see my skin color first and assume the worst." Karen felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to." "Intent doesn't erase impact," Amara cut her off, echoing the detective's earlier words. "Your actions today made me feel unwelcome and unsafe in a place I visit regularly. They reinforce the message that I don't belong, that I'm always always going to be seen as an outsider or a threat. As Amara spoke, Karen felt a growing sense of shame wash over her. The certainty she had felt earlier in the day seemed ridiculous now, faced with the real person she had hurt. "I am a CIA agent," Amara revealed, causing Karen's eyes to widen in shock. "The work I was doing on my laptop was sensitive and important. Your unfounded suspicions and subsequent actions not only personally affected me, but could have compromised national security," Karen gasped, the full weight of her mistake crashing down on her. I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I never meant to." "Mrs. Whitman," Amara interrupted, her tone firm but not unkind. "I don't need your apologies right now. What I need is for you to listen and to understand. Your actions today are part of a larger pattern, a systemic issue that affects people of color every day. We can't go about our lives without constantly being aware of how we might be perceived, always on guard against someone like you deciding we don't belong." Detective Martinez, who had been silently observing, chose this moment to interject. "Ms. Johnson, would you like to press charges against Mrs. Whitman?" Karen held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the moment that could change her life forever. She watched as Amara considered the question, her expression thoughtful. After what felt like an eternity, Amara spoke. "No, I don't want to press charges." Duh. Karen felt a rush of relief, but it was short-lived as Amara continued. "However, I do want there to be consequences, and more importantly, I want there to be change." "What do you propose?" Detective Martinez asked. Amara turned her gaze back to Karen. "Mrs. Whitman, I want you to understand that your actions today weren't just a mistake or a misunderstanding. They were the result of deeply ingrained biases that you need to confront and work to overcome. Are you willing to do that?" Karen nodded eagerly, grateful for any alternative to legal charges. "Yes, of course, I'll do anything." "Good," Amara said, "because here's what I'm proposing. Instead of pressing charges, I want you to commit to a comprehensive diversity and inclusion training program. I want you to volunteer with organizations that work to combat racial profiling and promote understanding between communities. And I want you to use your position in your neighborhood to educate others about the harm caused by racial biases and profiling." The proposal was daunting, far more involved than the simple apology Karen had imagined might suffice. But as she considered Amara's words, she realized that this was an opportunity not just to avoid legal trouble, but to genuinely grow and make amends. "I can do that," Karen said, her voice stronger now. "I want to do that. I never want to make anyone feel the way I made you feel today." Amara nodded, a hint of approval in her eyes. "It won't be easy, Mrs. Whitman. Confronting our biases rarely is, but it's necessary work, not just for you, but for our entire community." Detective Martinez looked between the two women. "Ms. Johnson, are you sure this is how you want to proceed? You have every right to pursue legal action." "I'm sure," Amara confirmed. "I believe that education and understanding can be more powerful than punishment in cases like these. However," she added, turning back to Karen, "if you fail to follow through on this agreement, or if there are any further incidents, I won't hesitate to take legal action." Karen nodded solemnly. "I understand. I promise I'll do everything you've asked and more. I want to make this right." As the details of the agreement were hammered out, with Detective Martinez documenting everything, Karen felt a mix of emotions swirling within her. There was relief at avoiding legal charges, shame at her actions, fear of the difficult work ahead, but also a glimmer of hope. Hope that she could indeed change, that she could use this horrible experience as a catalyst for growth and understanding. When everything was finalized, Amara stood to leave. She paused at the door, turning back to Karen one last time. "Mrs. Whitman, I hope that the next time you see someone who looks different from you, your first instinct will be curiosity, and we all have a lot to learn from each other." With that, Amara left, her words hanging in the air. Karen sat in silence for a moment, absorbing everything that had happened. She knew that her life would never be the same after today. The comfortable bubble she had lived in had been irrevocably burst. As she gathered her things to leave the police station, Karen made a silent vow to herself. She would not waste the opportunity Amara had given her. She would do the work, confront her biases, and strive to be a force for positive change in her community. It would be challenging, uncomfortable, and at times painful, but it was necessary. Stepping out into the afternoon sun, Karen took a deep breath. The world looked different now, as if a veil had been lifted from her eyes. She had a long journey ahead, but for the first time that day, she felt a sense of purpose. This was not the end of her story, but a new beginning, a chance to learn, to grow and to help create a community where everyone felt welcome and valued, regardless of the color of their skin. The tension in the air was palpable as Amara Johnson stepped out of the police station. Her heart was racing, but her face remained composed, a mask of professionalism she had perfected over years of CIA training. As she walked down the steps, she couldn't help but replay the events of the morning in her mind, a mix of anger and disbelief still simmering beneath her calm exterior. The vibration of her phone pulled her out of her thoughts. Glancing at the screen, she saw a message from her superior at the CIA. Report to headquarters immediately. Situation critical. Amara's jaw clenched. The operation she had been working on at the coffee shop was time-sensitive and highly classified. The interruption caused by Karen Whitman's unfounded suspicions could have jeopardized months of careful planning and intelligence gathering. As she hailed a taxi, Amara's mind raced through the potential consequences. Had their target been tipped off? Was the entire operation compromised? The weight of national security pressed down on her shoulders, made heavier by the knowledge that it had all been put at risk because of one woman's prejudice. The ride to CIA headquarters was a blur of city streets and anxious thoughts. Amara used the time to compose herself, pushing aside her personal feelings about the morning's events to focus on the task at hand. As a CIA agent, she had been trained to compartmentalize, to separate her emotions from her duty, but today, that separation felt more difficult than ever. Upon arriving at headquarters, Amara was immediately ushered into a secure briefing room. The atmosphere was tense, with senior officials huddled around a large screen, displaying real-time satellite imagery. Director Thompson, a stern-faced man with graying hair, looked up as Amara entered. "Agent Johnson," he said, his voice tight with concern. "We have a situation. Your abrupt departure from the coffee shop this morning raised red flags with our target. He's on the move." Amara's heart sank. "Sir, I can explain." Director Thompson held up a hand, cutting her off. "We don't have time for explanations now, Agent. We need to act fast to salvage this operation. Are you prepared to proceed?" Without hesitation, Amara nodded. "Yes, sir. What's the plan?" For the next hour, Amara was briefed on the rapidly evolving situation. The target, a high-level operative in an international terrorist organization, had been spooked by the commotion at the coffee shop and had accelerated his plan. Intelligence suggested he was planning to leave the country within the next 24 hours, potentially taking with him crucial information that could threaten national security. As Amara absorbed the details of the new mission parameters, she couldn't help but think of Karen Whitman. The woman's actions, born out of ignorance and prejudice, had set in motion a chain of events that now required a full-scale CIA response. The irony was not lost on Amara that the very person who had suspected her of wrongdoing had actually been the one to inadvertently aid a real threat to national security. "Agent Johnson," Director Thompson said, pulling Amara from her thoughts, "given your familiarity with the case and your exceptional field record, we want you to lead the extraction team. You'll be working with a small elite group to intercept the target before he can leave the country. Time is of the essence." Amara straightened her shoulders, pushing aside all thoughts of the morning's confrontation. This was what she had trained, for what she had dedicated her life to. "I understand, sir. When do we move out?" "Immediately," the director replied. "Your team is being assembled as we speak. You have full authority to do whatever is necessary to complete this mission successfully." The stakes couldn't be higher. As Amara left the briefing room to prepare for the mission, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Infuriating and unjust had to be put aside. Right now, her focus needed to be entirely on the task at hand. In the locker room, as she changed into her tactical gear, Amara allowed herself one brief moment of reflection. She thought about Karen Whitman, about the agreement they had reached at the police station. Would Karen follow through on her commitment to education and change? Or would this be just another incident swept under the rug, forgotten, until the next time someone's prejudices led to harmful actions? Shaking her head, Amara pushed those thoughts aside. She couldn't afford to be distracted now. Lives were at stake, and she had a job to do. As she strapped on her vest and checked her weapons, Amara's mind shifted fully into mission mode. The highly trained CIA agent took over, leaving behind the woman who had been profiled and harassed just hours before. Meeting her team in the hangar, Amara quickly assessed the group. 5 other agents, all seasoned professionals she had worked with before. There was a comfort in that familiarity, a shared understanding of the risks and responsibilities they were about to undertake. "All right, team," Amara said, her voice steady and authoritative. "You've all been briefed on the situation. Our window of opportunity is narrow, and the consequences of failure are unacceptable. We move fast, we move smart, and we get this done. Any questions?" The team's response was a unified shake of heads. They were ready, trusting in Amara's leadership and their own extensive training. As they boarded the helicopter that would take them to their insertion point, Amara felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with every high-stakes mission. The rhythmic thump of the helicopter blades filled the air as they lifted off. Through the window, Amara watched the city shrink beneath them, the everyday concerns of its inhabitants seeming small and distant from this vantage point. Somewhere down there, Karen Whitman was going about her day, perhaps still reeling from their encounter, perhaps already beginning to forget it. But up here, in the realm of international espionage and national security, a different reality held sway. As the helicopter sped towards their destination, Amara briefed her team on the latest intelligence updates. The target had been tracked to a private airfield just outside the city limits. It was believed he was planning to board a chartered flight to an unknown international destination. "Our primary objective is to apprehend the target and secure any intelligence materials he may be carrying," Amara explained, raising her voice over the noise of the helicopter. "Secondary objective is to identify and detain any associates who may be assisting in his escape. We expect resistance, so stay alert and watch each other's backs." The team nodded in understanding, each member mentally preparing for the challenges ahead. As they neared the drop zone, Amara felt a sense of calm settle over her. This was where she excelled, where her years of training and experience came into play. The complexities of civilian life, with its prejudices and misunderstandings, faded away in the face of the clear-cut objectives of the mission. The helicopter touched down a short distance from the airfield, hidden from view by a small copse of trees. Amara and her team disembarked swiftly, moving with practiced efficiency as they secured the area and prepared to move on their target. Through her earpiece, Amara received an update from headquarters. "Agent Johnson, satellite imagery shows increased activity at the airfield. A small private jet has just arrived and appears to be preparing for immediate departure. You need to move now." "Understood," Amara replied. Turning to her team, she gave a series of hand signals, silently communicating their approach strategy. They moved out, their steps quick but measured, weapons at the ready. As they neared the edge of the airfield, Amara could see the sleek form of the private jet, its engines already warming up. Several figures were moving around the aircraft, loading luggage and conducting last-minute checks. Among them, Amara spotted their target, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, his movements betraying a nervous energy. Amara's mind raced, calculating angles of approach, potential escape routes, and the likelihood of armed resistance. In that moment, all thoughts of Karen Whitman and the morning's events were completely erased from her mind. This was what she had been trained for, what she excelled at. Here, in the field, facing real threats to national security, there was no room for the kind of baseless suspicions that had disrupted her work earlier. With a series of silent hand signals, Amara coordinated her team's movements. They spread out, using the cover of parked vehicles and airport equipment to approach the jet undetected. Amara's heart pounded in her chest, but her hands were steady. Just as the target was about to ascend the stairs to the jet, Amara gave the signal. Her team burst into action, converging on the aircraft from multiple directions. "CIA, freeze!" Amara shouted, her voice carrying across the tarmac. Chaos erupted. The target's associates reached for weapons, but Amara's team was faster. Shots rang out, precise and controlled. Two of the armed men went down, while others threw up their hands in surrender. The target himself made a desperate dash for the jet, but Amara was already in motion. With a burst of speed, she closed the distance, tackling him just as he reached the bottom of the stairs. They hit the ground hard, and Amara quickly gained the upper hand, using her training to subdue them. And despite his frantic struggle, "It's over," Amara said firmly as she secured handcuffs around the man's wrists. "You're under arrest." As the dust settled, Amara surveyed evade the scene. Her team had successfully neutralized all threats, with no casualties on either side. The target was secured, and his associates were being rounded up. It was a textbook operation, executed flawlessly despite the rushed circumstances. While her team secured the area and began processing the suspects, Amara turned her attention to the jet. If their intelligence was correct, it would contain crucial documents and possibly digital files that could provide invaluable insights into the terrorist organization's plans. As she climbed the stairs to the aircraft, Amara couldn't help but reflect on the stark contrast between this moment and her experience at the coffee shop just hours earlier. Here, her skills, training, and dedication were unquestioned. Her authority was clear, her purpose understood and respected by all present. Inside the jet, Amara quickly located a locked briefcase. Using the specialized tools she carried, she made short work of the lock. Inside, she found exactly what they had been hoping for: a trove of documents and a laptop that undoubtedly contained a wealth of classified information. Securing the evidence, Amara exited the jet to find Director Thompson had arrived on the scene. His expression was one of satisfaction as he approached her. "Excellent work, Agent Johnson," he said, his tone sincere. "Your quick action and leadership have potentially saved countless lives. The intelligence we've recovered here will be invaluable in our ongoing efforts against this organization." Amara nodded, accepting the praise professionally. "Thank you. Sir, the team performed exceptionally. We couldn't have asked for a better outcome." As the cleanup operation began and the suspects were transported to secure facilities for interrogation, Amara found a quiet moment to herself. The adrenaline of the mission was beginning to wear off, and the events of the entire day washed over her. From being racially profiled in a coffee shop to leading a high-stakes CIA operation, all in the span of a few hours, it was almost too much to process. The juxtaposition of being seen as a threat by an ignorant civilian in the morning and then actually neutralizing a real threat to national security in the afternoon was not lost on Amara. As she watched the sun beginning to set over the airfield, Amara's thoughts turned once again to Karen Whitman. She wondered if the woman had any idea of the far-reaching consequences her actions had nearly caused. How close she had come to interfering with a critical national security operation, all because of her unfounded suspicions and prejudices. But Amara also thought about the agreement they had reached, the commitment Karen had made to educate herself and work towards change. Would this experience be a genuine turning point for Karen, or would it be forgotten, filed away as a one-time mistake rather than a symptom of a larger societal issue? Amara's contemplation was interrupted by a call from headquarters. There would be a full debriefing, followed by the painstaking process of analyzing the intelligence they had recovered. Her day was far from over. As she headed towards the waiting vehicle that would take her back to CIA headquarters, Amara made a decision. Once this operation was fully wrapped up, she would follow up on her agreement with Karen Whitman, not out of any obligation to the woman, but because Amara understood the importance of bridging the gap between the world she operated in and the civilian world that often misunderstood it. If her experience could serve as a catalyst for genuine change, even in just one person, then perhaps some good could come out of the unpleasant encounter at the coffee shop. And maybe, just maybe, it would be one small step towards a world where people like Amara could go about their vital work without facing baseless suspicion and prejudice. As the car pulled away from the airfield, Amara allowed herself a small smile. It had been a day of extreme contrasts, of frustration and triumph, but in the end, in her country, and possibly set the stage for positive change. For now, that was enough. The debriefing at CIA headquarters was long and thorough. Amara recounted every detail of the operation, from the initial complications at the coffee shop to the successful apprehension of the target at the airfield. Her superiors listened intently, their expressions a mix of concern over the near compromise of the mission and admiration for Amara's quick thinking and effective leadership. Agent Johnson, Director Thompson said as the debriefing concluded, "Your performance today was exemplary. You turned what could have been a disaster into a major victory for national security. However, we need to address the incident at the coffee shop." Amara nodded, having expected this. "Yes, sir. I understand the security implications and take full responsibility for..." The director held up a hand, cutting her off. "Amara," he said, his tone softening slightly. What happened to you this morning was unacceptable. No agent should have to deal with racial profiling while carrying out their duties. We're going to be reviewing our protocols to better protect our operatives from these kinds of situations in the future. Surprised by the director's words, Amara felt a wave of emotion she had been suppressing throughout the day. Thank you, sir, she managed, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. Now, Director Thompson continued, his tone becoming businesslike again, we have a mountain of intelligence to go through. I want you to lead the analysis team. Your familiarity with the case makes you the best person for the job. Amara straightened in her chair, pushing aside her personal feelings once more. Of course, sir, I'm ready to get started immediately. For the next several hours, Amara immersed herself in the wealth of information they had recovered. The documents and digital files from the target's briefcase proved to be a goldmine of intelligence, revealing details of planned attacks, financial networks, and key players in the terrorist organization. As she worked, coordinating with other analysts and piecing together the complex puzzle of international terrorism, Amara felt a sense of purpose that overshadowed the negative experiences of the morning. This was why she had joined the CIA, why she endured the long hours, the danger, and yes, even the occasional brush with ignorance and prejudice in the civilian world. It was well past midnight when Amara finally left headquarters. As she stepped out into the cool night air, she felt a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. The day had been a roller coaster of emotions and experiences, but in the end, she had made a real difference. Driving home, Amara's thoughts drifted once again to Karen Whitman. The woman's face, a mixture of fear and confusion, flashed in her mind. Amara wondered what Karen was doing now, whether the events of the day had sparked any real reflection or change in her worldview. As she pulled into her driveway, Amara made a decision. She would follow through on the agreement they had made. At the police station, not just as a way to educate Karen, but as a means of bridging the gap between her world of covert operations and the everyday reality of the civilians she was working to protect. Inside her home, Amara allowed herself to relax for the first time in what felt like days. She poured a glass of wine and sank into her comfortable armchair, finally letting the full weight of the day's events wash over her. From being racially profiled in a coffee shop to leading a high-stakes CIA operation, all in the span of a single day, it was almost too much to process. The stark contrast between being seen as a threat by an ignorant civilian and then actually neutralizing a real threat to national security was not lost on Amara. As she sipped her wine, Amara's mind began to formulate a plan. She would use her experience, both as a CIA agent and as a woman of color, navigating a predominantly white society, to create a comprehensive training program. It would go beyond the basic diversity training Karen had agreed to, delving into the real-world consequences of racial profiling and the importance of looking beyond surface-level judgments. Amara knew it wouldn't be easy. Changing deeply ingrained biases and preconceptions was a monumental task. But if her work at the CIA had taught her anything, it was that even the most complex and seemingly insurmountable problems could be tackled with persistence, intelligence, and a willingness to see beyond one's own perspective with a renewed sense of purpose. Amara opened her laptop and began outlining her ideas. She would start with Karen, but she hoped to expand the program, perhaps even bringing it to local law enforcement agencies and community organizations. It was a small step, but an important one in bridging the gap between her world and the civilian population she worked tirelessly to protect. Began to filter through her windows. Amara finally closed her laptop and headed to bed. She had only a few hours before she needed to be back at headquarters, continuing the analysis of the intelligence they had gathered. But as she drifted off to sleep, Amara felt a sense of hope. The day had been challenging, but it had also opened up new possibilities for positive change. The next morning, Amara arrived at CIA headquarters early, her mind sharp despite the lack of sleep. The analysis room was already bustling with activity as agents and analysts pored over the recovered documents and digital files. Amara jumped right in, her expertise and familiarity with the case proving invaluable as they pieced together the complex web of the terrorist organization's operations. As the day progressed, the true scope of what they had uncovered began to emerge. The intelligence pointed to a vast network spanning multiple countries with plans for attacks that, if successful could have devastating consequences. Amara felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that her work here could save countless lives. During a brief break, Amara checked her personal phone and found a message from an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat as she read it. Ms. Johnson, this is Karen Whitman. I hope it's okay that I got your number from the police station. I've been thinking a lot about what happened and what you said. I'm ready to start that training program whenever you are. I want to do better. Amara stared at the message for a long moment, a mix of emotions washing over her. Part of her was surprised that Karen had taken the initiative to reach out so soon. Another part was cautiously optimistic that this could be the start of real change. After a moment's hesitation, Amara typed out a reply. Mrs. Whitman, I appreciate you reaching out. I'm currently working on developing a comprehensive program that I believe will be beneficial. I'll contact you when it's ready to begin. In the meantime, I encourage you to start educating yourself on issues of racial bias and its impacts. Sending the message, Amara felt a sense of accomplishment. It was a small step, but an important one. She was bridging the gap between her world of national security and the everyday reality of civilian life, working to create understanding and change on both fronts. As she returned to the analysis room, Amara carried with her a renewed sense of purpose. She was not just a CIA agent, working to protect her country from external threats. She was also an agent of change, working to combat the internal threats of prejudice and misunderstanding that could be just as dangerous in their own way. The day continued, filled with intense analysis and breakthrough discoveries. But even as Amara immersed herself in the vital work of national security, a part of her mind was already planning for the equally important task that lay ahead. She knew that true security came not just from thwarting external threats, but from fostering understanding and unity within. As the sun set on another long day at CIA headquarters, Amara packed up her things, her mind already racing with ideas for the training program she would develop. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but she was ready to face it head-on. After all, she had faced down international terrorists and suburban prejudice alike. Whatever came next, Amara Johnson was prepared to meet it with the same determination, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to justice that had brought her this far. The weeks following the incident at the Starbucks were a whirlwind of activity for both Amara Johnson and Karen Whitman. While Amara juggled her CIA duties with developing a comprehensive training program, Karen found herself grappling with the aftermath of her actions and the stark realization of her own biases. For Amara, the days were long and demanding. At the CIA, she led the team analyzing the intelligence gathered from the intercepted terrorist operative. The information proved invaluable, leading to the disruption of several planned attacks and the identification of key players in the international network. Her superiors praised her work, with Director Thompson even hinting at a possible promotion in the near future. But as soon as her official duties ended each day, Amara threw herself into creating the diversity and inclusion program she had promised. She pored over academic studies, consulted with experts in racial bias and community relations, and drew from her own experiences to craft a curriculum that would not only educate but also foster genuine understanding and empathy. Meanwhile, Karen Whitman's life had been turned upside down. The incident at the coffee shop had not remained private, as she had hoped. Someone had recorded her confrontation with Amara outside the Starbucks and posted it online. The video quickly went viral, and Karen found herself at the center of a social media storm. Karen's employer, a prestigious law firm where she had worked as a paralegal for over a decade, placed her on indefinite leave pending an internal investigation. Her neighbors, once friendly and welcoming, now regarded her with a mix of suspicion and disappointment. Even some of her closest friends distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with the controversy. Karen's family was struggling too. Her husband Tom was supportive, but clearly stressed by the situation. Their 2 teenage children were embarrassed and angry, forced to deal with the fallout at school, where their mother's actions had become a hot topic of discussion. As the days passed, Karen found herself spiraling into depression. The comfortable life she had known, the identity she had built for herself as a respectable member of the community seemed to be crumbling around her. She spent hours reading the comments on social media, each harsh judgment and call for accountability, feeling like a physical blow. But amidst the darkness, Karen clung to the lifeline Amara had offered her. The promise of the training program, the opportunity to learn and grow, became a beacon of hope. Karen threw herself into self-education, reading books on racial justice, watching documentaries about the African American experience, and engaging with online resources about unconscious bias. It was during this period of self-reflection that Karen had an epiphany. She realized that her actions at the Starbucks weren't an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of a lifetime of unchecked biases and privileged assumptions. The realization was painful, forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself and the society she lived in. As Karen delved deeper into her journey of self-discovery, Amara was putting the finishing touches on her training program. She had decided to start with a small group, including Karen and a few others who had been involved in similar incidents. The program would be intense, combining academic learning with real-world experiences designed to challenge preconceptions and foster empathy. Finally, the day arrived for the first session. Amara had secured a conference room at a local community center, neutral ground that would put everyone at ease. As she set up her materials, she felt a mix of anticipation and apprehension. This was uncharted territory for her, far removed from the high-stakes world of international espionage she was accustomed to. Yet in many ways, she felt the work she was about to do was just as important as her CIA missions. Karen arrived early, her nervousness evident in her hesitant steps and fidgeting hands. She had dressed carefully, wanting to make a good impression, but the strain of the past week showed in the dark circles under her eyes and the tightness around her mouth. "Mrs. Whitman," Amara greeted her, keeping her tone professional but not unkind. "Thank you for coming. Please take a seat." Karen nodded, managing a weak smile. "Thank you for doing this, Ms. Johnson. I want you to know how sorry I am and how committed I am to learning and changing." Amara acknowledged Karen's words with a nod. "That's why we're here, Mrs. Whitman. This isn't about punishment or shame. It's about growth and understanding." As the other participants arrived, a palpable tension filled the room. There were 5 in total, each with their own story of racial profiling or discrimination that had led them to this moment. Amara took a deep breath, centering herself before beginning the session. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice clear and confident. "We're here today to start a journey. It won't be an easy one. We'll be confronting uncomfortable truths, challenging long-held beliefs, and pushing ourselves to see the world through new eyes. But I promise you, if you commit to this process, you'll come out the other side with a deeper understanding, not just of others, but of yourself." Over the next several hours, Amara led the group through a series of exercises and discussions. They examined the historical roots of racial bias, explored the concept of privilege, and shared personal experiences of both witnessing and experiencing discrimination. For Karen, the session was emotionally grueling. Each new piece of information, each shared story, seemed to peel back another layer of her own ignorance. She found herself oscillating between defensive resistance and overwhelming guilt. During a particularly intense discussion about the impact of microaggressions, Karen broke down. "I just don't understand," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "How could I have been so blind? I've always thought of myself as a good person, but now I see how much harm I've caused without even realizing it." Amara approached Karen, her expression compassionate but firm. "Mrs. Whitman, recognizing our biases is the first step towards changing them. The fact that you're here, comfortable truths, shows that you are a good person. Good people can still have biases. The important thing is what we do once we become aware of them." As the session wound down, Amara could see the impact it had had on all the participants. They looked drained, but also somehow lighter, as if a burden they hadn't known they were carrying had been lifted. She knew this was just the beginning, that real change would require ongoing effort and commitment, but it was a start. "Thank you all for your openness and willingness to engage today," Amara said as they prepared to leave. "This is not easy work, but it's necessary. I want you to take what you've learned here and really sit with it. Observe your thoughts and actions in the coming week. Notice when your biases surface and challenge them. We'll meet again next week to discuss your experiences and delve deeper. As the participants filed out, Karen lingered behind. She approached Amara, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "Miss Johnson," she began, her voice steady despite her evident emotion, "I want to thank you, not just for this program, but for giving me the chance to learn and grow. I know I have a long way to go, but I'm committed to doing the work." Amara nodded, allowing a small smile to cross her face. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Whitman. Remember, this isn't about becoming perfect overnight. It's about continuous growth and awareness. Keep challenging yourself, keep learning, and most importantly, use what you learn to educate others." As Karen left, Amara began packing up her materials, her mind already planning the next session. She felt a sense of accomplishment, different from but no less significant than what she felt after a successful CIA operation. Here, she wasn't just protecting people from external threats, but working to dismantle the internal threats of bias and discrimination that could be just as dangerous. The following week brought new challenges for both Amara and Karen. At the CIA, Amara was deep into a complex operation tracking a new terrorist cell that had emerged in Southeast Asia. The work was intense and time-consuming, often requiring her to work late into the night. Despite her hectic schedule, Amara remained committed to the training program. She used her lunch breaks and any free moments to refine the curriculum, incorporate feedback from the first session, and prepare for the next meeting. For Karen, the week was a journey of self-discovery and often uncomfortable realizations. Following Amara's instructions, she paid close attention to her thoughts and actions, noticing patterns of bias she had never been aware of before. She found herself catching knee-jerk reactions and assumptions, forcing herself to pause and reconsider. One particularly eye-opening moment came when Karen was shopping at her local grocery store. She noticed a group of young black men in hoodies near the entrance and felt an immediate surge of unease. In the past, she might have clutched her purse tighter or even decided to shop elsewhere, but this time, she forced herself to confront the feeling. Why was she uncomfortable? What assumptions was she making based solely on appearance? As she watched, she saw the young men laughing and joking among themselves, clearly just friends hanging out. The realization of how quickly she had judged them based on stereotypes hit her hard. When the next training session arrived, Karen was eager to share her experience. As the group settled in, Amara could see a change in their demeanor. There was still nervousness, but also a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. "Welcome back, everyone," Amara began. "I hope this past week has been illuminating for you all. Today, we're going to dive deeper into recognizing and challenging our unconscious biases. But first, I'd like to hear about your experiences since our last meeting. Who would like to start?" Karen raised her hand, surprising herself with her eagerness to share. As she recounted her experience at the grocery store, she could see nods of recognition from the others in the group. Her story sparked a rich discussion about the pervasiveness of stereotypes and the mental effort required to challenge them. As the session progressed, Amara guided the group through more advanced concepts. They explored intersectionality, discussing how different forms of discrimination can overlap and compound. They examined the role of media in perpetuating racial stereotypes and brainstormed ways to be more critical consumers of information. Throughout the session, Amara was impressed by the group's engagement and willingness to grapple with difficult topics. She saw moments of discomfort, even resistance, but also breakthrough moments of understanding and empathy. For Karen, one of the most powerful moments came during a role-playing exercise. Amara had paired the participants up, assigning them scenarios to act out that involved. Karen found herself playing the role of a young black woman trying to hail a taxi, while her partner played a series of drivers who passed her by in favor of white passengers. As Karen immersed herself in the role, she felt a deep sense of frustration and helplessness. Even though it was just an exercise, the experience of being repeatedly overlooked and dismissed based on her perceived race was emotionally draining. When the exercise ended, Karen was near tears. "I had no idea she said, her voice shaky. I mean, I've heard about this kind of thing happening, but to actually feel it, even in a simulated way, it's overwhelming. How do people deal with this kind of treatment day after day? Amara nodded, her expression solemn. That's a reality many people of color face regularly, Mrs. Whitman. It's not just about the big, obvious acts of discrimination. It's the constant, subtle messages that you don't belong, that you're less than. It takes a toll. The discussion that followed was raw and emotional, but also deeply enlightening. Participants shared their own experiences, both as targets of discrimination and, more uncomfortably, times when they had been the ones perpetuating harmful stereotypes. As the session wound down, Amara could see the impact it had had on everyone, including herself. Leading these sessions, hearing the stories, and seeing the gradual shifts in understanding was affecting her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Before we end today, Amara said, I want to acknowledge the hard work you're all doing. Confronting our biases isn't easy. It's uncomfortable, often painful, but it's also necessary and ultimately rewarding. You're not just changing yourselves, you're contributing to changing our society for the better. As the participants left, Amara felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. This work was draining in a different way from her CIA duties, but no, less important, she was making a difference, not by thwarting terrorists or uncovering international conspiracies, but by changing hearts and minds, one person at a time. Over the next few weeks, the training program continued to evolve. Amara brought in guest speakers, including community leaders and academics specializing in race relations. She organized field trips to diverse neighborhoods and cultural centers, encouraging the participants to immerse themselves in experiences outside their usual comfort zones. For Karen, each session brought new insights and challenges. She found herself questioning beliefs and assumptions she had held for decades. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of defensiveness, of wanting to retreat back into the comfort of old ways of thinking. But Karen pushed through, motivated by a genuine desire to change and by the supportive environment Amara had created. As the program progressed, Karen began to see changes in her daily life. She caught herself more quickly when biased thoughts arose and actively sought out diverse perspectives in her media consumption and social interactions. She even started having difficult but necessary conversations with friends and family members about race and privilege. One evening, about halfway through the program, Karen received a call from her employer. The law firm had completed its investigation and was prepared to offer her the opportunity to return to work on the condition that she complete a company-mandated diversity training program. Karen was relieved at the prospect of regaining some normalcy in her life, but she also felt a sense of determination. Thank you for the opportunity, she told her supervisor, but I'd like to propose something. The training program I'm currently in, led by Ms. Johnson, is far more comprehensive than anything I've seen before. Would the firm consider allowing me to continue this program instead? I believe it would be more beneficial not just for me, but potentially for the entire company. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a thoughtful response. That's an interesting proposal, Karen. Can you send me more information about this program? If it's as comprehensive as you say, we might consider implementing it more broadly. Karen felt a surge of excitement. This was an opportunity to extend the impact of Amara's program beyond just the initial participants. She immediately reached out to Amara to discuss the possibility. When Amara received Karen's message, she was in the middle of a late-night briefing at CIA headquarters. The operation tracking the Southeast Asian terrorist cell was reaching a critical point, and Amara's expertise was crucial. But even as she focused on the high-stakes intelligence work, a part of her mind was already considering the possibilities Karen's proposal presented. The next day, after catching a few hours of sleep, Amara met with Karen to discuss the law firm's interest. As they sat in a quiet corner of a local cafe, Amara could see the change of Karen. From their first encounter had been replaced by someone more thoughtful, more aware, and genuinely eager to make a difference. This is a significant opportunity, Mrs. Whitman, Amara said, her tone serious but encouraging. If we can get a major law firm to adopt this program, it could set a precedent for other businesses, but it will also mean more scrutiny and potentially some pushback. Are you prepared for that? Karen nodded, her expression determined. I am. I know it won't be easy, but I believe in this program. It's changed my life, Ms. Johnson. If we can bring that change to more people, isn't it worth the challenge? Amara felt a sense of pride pride, both in Karen's growth and in the impact of the program she had created. All right then, let's put together a proposal for your firm, but we'll need to be strategic about this. We're not just selling a training program. We're advocating for a fundamental shift in corporate culture. Over the next week, Amara and Karen worked tirelessly to develop a comprehensive proposal for the law firm. They outlined the program's curriculum, provided data on its effectiveness, and included testimonials from participants. Amara even reached out to some of her academic contacts to provide additional credibility to the proposal. As they worked, Amara was struck by the parallels between this project and her CIA work. Both required strategic thinking, careful planning, and the ability to anticipate and counter potential objections. The stakes were different, but the skills were surprisingly transferable. Finally, the day came for Karen to present the proposal to her firm's executive committee. Amara had coached her extensively, but as Karen stood before the group of stern-faced partners, she felt a moment of panic. Then she remembered all she had learned, all she had experienced, and found her voice. Ladies and gentlemen, Karen began, her voice steady, I stand before you today not just as an employee seeking reinstatement, but as someone who has undergone a profound personal transformation. The program I'm proposing isn't just another box to check off in our diversity initiatives. It's a comprehensive, transformative experience that has the power to change not just individuals, but our entire corporate culture. As Karen went through the proposal, she could see the partners' expressions changing from skepticism to interest. She shared her own story, not shying away from the mistakes she had made, but emphasizing the growth and understanding she had gained. She presented data, outlined the potential benefits for the firm, and passionately argued for the importance of creating a truly inclusive workplace. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then the managing partner leaned forward. Mrs. Whitman, I must say this is impressive. We'll need to review the details, of course, but I believe you've given us something significant to consider. Thank you for your candor and your evident commitment to personal growth. As Karen left the meeting, she felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had done all she could. Now it was up to the partners to make their decision. She immediately called Amara to update her on how the presentation had gone. Amara listened to Karen's account with a growing sense of satisfaction. Regardless of the firm's decision, the fact that Karen had stood before her employers and advocated so passionately for this program was a testament to how far she had come. You should be proud of yourself, Mrs. Whitman, Amara said warmly. Whatever the outcome, you've taken a significant step today, not just for yourself, but for potential change on a larger scale. As they ended the call, Amara found herself reflecting on the journey they had both undertaken. From that tense confrontation in the Starbucks to this moment of potential widespread impact, it had been a transformative experience for both of them. For Amara, it reinforced her belief in the power of education and open dialogue to combat prejudice and discrimination. It also showed her another way she could serve her country and community beyond her clandestine work with the CIA. As she prepared for another late night at CIA headquarters, tracking the movements of international terrorists, Amara felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was fighting for a safer, more just world on multiple fronts now. And while the challenges were great, the potential for positive change made it all worthwhile. The next few days were tense as Karen awaited the law firm's decision. She threw herself into the ongoing training sessions, finding comfort in the supportive environment Amara had created. The other participants had become a kind of family, united in their commitment to growth and change. Finally, a week after her presentation, Karen received the call she had been waiting for. The managing partner's voice was warm as he delivered the news. Mrs. Whitman, extensively. We're impressed not just with the program itself, but with your personal growth and commitment to change. We've decided not only to reinstate you, but also to implement this training program firm-wide. Moreover, we'd like you to work with HR to oversee its implementation. Karen was momentarily speechless, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was hearing. When she found her voice, it was thick with emotion. Thank you, sir. I'm honored by your trust in me and excited about the potential impact this program can have on our firm. As soon as the call ended, Karen reached out to Amara, eager to share the news. Amara was in the middle of a critical operation, coordinating a multi-agency effort to intercept a shipment of illegal weapons. But when she saw Karen's message, she knew it was important. Stepping away from the command center for a moment, Amara called Karen back. As she listened to Karen excitedly relay the firm's decision, Amara felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was a significant victory, not just for Karen or for the program, but for the broader fight against systemic bias and discrimination. "This is excellent news, Mrs. Whitman," Amara said, her voice warm with pride. "You've opened a door here, not just for yourself, but for real, substantial change within your organization. The work is far from over, of course. Implementing this program firm-wide will come with its own challenges, but I have faith in your ability to navigate them." As they discussed next steps and the logistics of scaling up the program, Amara was struck by how far they had both come. From that tense moment in the Starbucks to this collaboration for widespread change, their journey had been transformative. For Karen, it was the beginning of a new chapter. She would return to work not just as a paralegal, but as an agent of change within her organization. The road ahead would not be easy, but she felt prepared and motivated in a way she never had before. For Amara, it was a powerful reminder of the multiple ways she could serve her country and community. As she returned to the command center, ready to continue her work protecting national security, she carried with her the knowledge that she was also contributing to a different kind of security, the creation of a more just and equitable society. As the day drew to a close, both women felt a sense of accomplishment and purpose. They had taken a negative incident and turned it into an opportunity for growth, education, and systemic change. And while there was still much work to be done, they had laid a foundation for a more inclusive and understanding future. The implementation of Amara Johnson's diversity and inclusion program at Karen Whitman's law firm marked a significant turning point for both women. For Karen, it was an opportunity to transform her workplace and continue her journey of personal growth. For Amara, it represented a tangible impact of her efforts beyond the clandestine world of the CIA. As Karen prepared for her first day back at the firm, she felt a mix of nervousness and determination. She knew that some of her colleagues might be skeptical or even hostile towards the new program, but she also felt equipped with the knowledge and skills to handle difficult conversations and promote understanding. The morning of her return, Karen stood in front of her closet, carefully selecting her outfit. She wanted to project confidence and professionalism, but also approachability. As she buttoned up her blouse, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked different somehow, more self-assured, more aware. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the day ahead. At the office, Karen was greeted with a mix of reactions. Some colleagues welcomed her warmly, expressing support for her journey and the new program. Others were more reserved, offering polite but distant greetings, and a few, she noticed, avoided eye contact altogether, their discomfort palpable. The managing partner met with Karen in her office, outlining her new responsibilities in overseeing the implementation of the diversity program. "We're counting on you, Karen," he said, his tone serious. "This is a significant investment for the firm, both financially and in terms of our culture. We need this to succeed." Karen nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility. "I understand, sir. I'm committed to making this work, not just for the firm, but for all of us as individuals." And as she left the partner's office, Karen spotted a small group of junior associates huddled together, casting furtive glances her way. She took a deep breath and approached them, reminding herself of the techniques Amara had taught her for initiating difficult conversations. "Good morning," she said, her voice warm but confident. "I know there's been a lot of talk about the new diversity program. If any of you have questions or concerns, I'm all." The associates exchanged uncertain looks before one of them, a young man named Alex, spoke up. "No offense, Karen, but why should we trust you to lead this? Weren't you the one who caused all this trouble in the first place?" Karen felt a flash of defensiveness, but pushed it aside. "That's a fair question, Alex," she replied calmly. "Yes, I made a serious mistake, but that mistake led me on a journey of learning and growth that I believe uniquely qualifies me to guide others through this process. I've experienced firsthand the damage that unconscious bias can cause, and I've also experienced the transformative power of education and self-reflection." Her honesty seemed to catch the associates off guard. They listened attentively as Karen briefly shared her experience with Amara's program and how it had had changed her perspective. By the time she finished, the tension in the group had noticeably eased. "I'm not asking you to trust me blindly," Karen concluded. "I'm asking for the opportunity to show you the value of this program through action. Can we start there?" The associates nodded, some even offering small smiles. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was a start. As Karen walked away, she felt a sense of accomplishment. She had faced her first challenge head-on and come through it stronger. Meanwhile, across town, Amara was facing challenges of her own. The successful implementation of her program at Karen's law firm had caught the attention of several other companies and organizations. Requests for consultations and proposals were flooding in, threatening to overwhelm her already packed schedule. As she sat in her office at CIA headquarters, Amara found herself at a crossroads. The demand for her diversity program was growing rapidly, offering an opportunity to effect real change on a broader scale. But her work with the CIA was crucial and fulfilling in its own right. How could she balance these two important aspects of her life? A knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts. It was Director Thompson, his expression serious. "Agent Johnson, we need to talk." Amara's heart raced as she followed the director to a secure conference room. Had her outside work with the diversity program compromised her position at the CIA? As they sat down, Director Thompson's stern expression softened slightly. "Amara," he began, using her first name, which was unusual, "your work on the recent Southeast Asian operation was exemplary, but I've also been hearing about this diversity program you've developed. Word travels fast, especially when it involves one of our top agents." Amara tensed, preparing herself for a reprimand, but what the director said next caught her completely off guard. "I think you're onto something important here, something that could benefit not just civilian organizations, but our agency as well. We've been looking to overhaul our own diversity and inclusion initiatives. Your program could be exactly what we need." Amara blinked in surprise. "Sir, are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting, Agent Johnson, that we find a way to incorporate your program into our agency's training protocols. Of course, this would require some adaptation to fit our unique needs and security concerns, but I believe the potential benefits are significant." As the director outlined his vision, Amara felt a surge of excitement. This was an opportunity to bring meaningful change to one of the most influential agencies in the country, but it would also mean taking on even more responsibility, further stretching her already limited time and energy. "I'm honored by your confidence in the program." Sir," Amara said carefully, "but I have to ask how this would affect my current duties. I'm committed to my work as a field agent." Director Thompson nodded, understanding. "We'll need to make some adjustments. Your expertise in the field is invaluable, but so is this program you've developed. I'm proposing we create a new position for you. You'll continue to be involved in key operations, but you'll also lead the implementation and ongoing development of this diversity initiative within the agency." As Amara left the meeting, her mind was reeling with the possibilities and challenges ahead. She had entered the CIA with the goal of protecting her country from external threats. Now she had the opportunity to address internal threats as well, the biases and prejudices that could undermine the agency's effectiveness and integrity. Over the next few weeks, both Amara and Karen threw themselves into their new roles. Karen faced resistance from some corners of the law firm, but found allies in unexpected places. She worked tirelessly to address concerns, facilitate discussions, and guide her colleagues through the sometimes uncomfortable process of confronting their own biases. One particularly challenging moment came during a training session with a group of senior partners. An older partner, known for his concern on microaggression. "This all seems like oversensitivity to me," he grumbled. "In my day, people had thicker skin. Now everyone's looking for reasons to be offended." Karen took a deep breath, reminding herself to approach the comment with empathy rather than defensiveness. "I understand where you're coming from," she began. "Change can be uncomfortable, especially when it challenges ideas we've held for a long time. But let me ask you this. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt out of place or unwelcome, even if no one said anything overtly hostile?" The partner hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I suppose so. There was this time at a tech conference I attended. I felt like a dinosaur among all these young hotshots. That feeling of discomfort, of not belonging, is what many people experience regularly due to subtle biases and microaggressions, Karen explained. It's not about having thin skin. It's about creating an environment where everyone can feel valued and do their best work. The conversation that followed was lively and at times heated, but Karen managed to keep it productive. By the end of the session, even the skeptical partner seemed more open to the ideas being presented. As Karen navigated these challenges at the law firm, Amara was working to adapt her program for implementation at the CIA. The task was daunting, requiring her to balance the need for openness and honest dialogue with the agency's stringent security protocols. One of Amara's first steps was to assemble a diverse team of agents and analysts to help tailor the program. She wanted to ensure that the unique experiences and perspectives of different groups within the agency were represented. During one of their early planning sessions, a heated debate erupted over how to address racial profiling in intelligence gathering. Some team members argued that certain profiling techniques were necessary for effective operations, while others pushed for a complete overhaul of these practices. Amara listened carefully to both sides, then spoke. Our job is to gather accurate intelligence and protect our country. If our own biases are clouding our judgment or causing us to overlook valuable sources and allies, then we're not doing our job effectively. This isn't about political correctness. It's about being better at what we do. Her words seemed to resonate, with the team shifting the conversation from a debate over ideology to a practical discussion of how to improve their methods. It was a small victory, but an important one in the long process of changing the agency's culture. As the weeks turned into months, both Amara and Karen began to see the fruits of their labor. At the law firm, Karen noticed a shift in the office dynamics. Conversations about race and diversity, once awkward and avoided, were becoming more common and nuanced. Minority staff members reported feeling more valued and included, and the firm was attracting a more diverse pool of job applicants. At the CIA, Amara's program was making waves. Agents who had initially been skeptical were reporting that the training had improved their field work, helping them build better relationships with informants and navigate complex cultural situations more effectively. One afternoon, as Amara was reviewing feedback from the latest training session, she received an unexpected visitor. It was Karen, looking polished and confident in her business attire. Ms. Johnson, Karen greeted her warmly. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Amara smiled, gesturing for Karen to take a seat. Not at all, Mrs. Whitman. It's good to see you. How are things at the firm? Karen's face lit up. That's actually why I'm here. The managing partners are thrilled with the progress we've made, so much so that they want to expand the program. They're talking about offering it to our clients as a value-added service. Amara raised an eyebrow, intrigued. That's quite a step. How do you feel about it? Honestly, I'm excited but also a little overwhelmed, Karen admitted. The potential impact is huge, but so is the responsibility. That's why I wanted to talk to you. I was hoping you might consider partnering with us on this. Your expertise would be invaluable. Amara leaned back in her chair, considering the proposal. It was an exciting opportunity, a chance to extend the reach of her program even further, but she was already juggling her CIA duties with the implementation of the diversity initiative within the agency. It's an interesting proposition, Mrs. Whitman, Amara said carefully. But I have to be honest, my plate is pretty full at the moment. Karen nodded, understanding. I thought that might be the case, but I was hoping we might be able to work out some kind of collaboration, maybe a train-the-trainer program. You could help us develop a team to deliver the training, with you providing oversight and advanced sessions. As they found herself growing excited about the potential, this could be a way to scale up the program's impact without overextending herself. Plus, the idea of training others to deliver the program aligned with her broader goal of creating lasting systemic change. All right, Mrs. Whitman, Amara said finally. I think we can make this work. It'll take some careful planning and coordination, but I believe the potential benefits are worth it. Karen beamed, reaching out to shake Amara's hand. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I can't tell you how much this means, not just to me or the firm, but to all the people this program will reach. As Karen left, Amara sat back in her chair, marveling at how far they had come. From that tense confrontation in the coffee shop to this moment of collaboration and shared purpose, their journey had been remarkable. She thought about the challenges that still lay ahead. Changing deeply ingrained biases and systemic inequalities was no easy task. There would be resistance, setbacks, and moments of frustration, but there would also be breakthroughs, moments of connection and understanding that made it it all worthwhile. Amara's phone buzzed, reminding her of a briefing she needed to attend. As she gathered her things, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her work with the CIA and her diversity initiative were not separate pursuits, but two sides of the same coin. Both were about making the world a safer, more just place. As she walked to the briefing room, Amara allowed herself a small smile. The road ahead would be challenging, but she was ready for it, and she wasn't alone. With allies like Karen and the growing network of people committed to change, she felt confident that they could make a real difference. The briefing room was abuzz with activity as Amara entered. Agents and analysts were huddled around screens, their faces tense with concentration. Director Thompson motioned for Amara to join him at the head of the room. "We've got a situation brewing in Eastern Europe," he said without preamble. "I need your expertise on this, Johnson, but I also need you to keep in mind how our new diversity protocols might apply here." Amara nodded, her mind already shifting gears to tackle the complex geopolitical scenario unfolding before her. As she immersed herself in the details of the operation, she realized that her work on the diversity program had given her a new perspective on international relations as well. She found herself considering cultural nuances and historical contexts that might have escaped her notice before. As she shared her insights with the team, she could see the impact of her broadened perspective. The operation they were planning became more nuanced, more attuned to the complex realities on the ground. Hours later, as the team finalized their strategy, Director Thompson pulled Amara aside. "Excellent work, Johnson," he said, his tone approving. "Your suggestions about incorporating local community leaders into our intelligence gathering, it's not something we would have considered before, but I can see how it could make our operation more effective and potentially prevent unnecessary conflicts." Amara felt a surge of pride. This was tangible proof that the diversity initiative was not just about feel-good platitudes or political correctness. It was about making them better at their jobs, more effective in their mission to protect the country and promote global stability. As she left the CIA headquarters that evening, Amara's mind was already racing with ideas for how to incorporate this real-world example into her training program. She made a mental note to discuss it with Karen and the team they were assembling to expand the program's reach. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity for both Amara and Karen. The collaboration between the CIA's diversity initiative and the law firm's program created a powerful synergy, each enhancing and informing the other. Karen found herself traveling to other law firms and corporate clients, sharing her personal story and the transformative impact of the program. She faced skepticism and sometimes outright hostility, but she also found a growing audience hungry for change. One particularly memorable session took place at a major tech company in Silicon Valley. The room was filled with engineers and executives, many of whom seemed more interested in their smartphones than in Karen's presentation. As Karen began to speak, sharing her story of that day in the coffee shop, she noticed a shift in the room. Heads lifted, eyes focused on her. When she described the moment, she realized the depth of her own biases. She saw recognition flicker across many faces. "I thought I was one of the good ones," Karen said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "I had black friends. I supported equal rights. But when it came down to it, my unconscious biases led me to profile a highly accomplished." It made me realize that being not racist isn't enough. We have to be actively anti-racist, constantly examining and challenging our own assumptions. The Q&A session that followed was lively and engaged. Engineers shared stories of feeling isolated or overlooked in their teams. Executives asked pointed questions about how to create truly inclusive environments. By the end of the session, the energy in the room had transformed from skepticism to enthusiasm. As Karen packed up her materials, a young woman approached her. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I've been to so many diversity trainings that felt like box-ticking exercises. This is the first time I felt like someone really understood the issues and was offering practical ways to address them." Meanwhile, Amara was seeing the impact of the program within the CIA. Agents were reporting back from field operations, sharing how the training had helped them navigate complex cultural situations more effectively. One agent, recently returned from a mission in Southeast Asia, recounted how the program's emphasis on cultural competence had helped him establish trust with a key informant foreman. In the past, I might have missed the subtle cues that were so important in that culture, he explained. But because of the training, I was able to pick up on them and adjust my approach. It made all the difference in building that crucial relationship. Amara also found that the program was attracting a more diverse pool of recruits to the agency. Young people from various backgrounds were expressing interest in CIA careers, seeing it as an organization committed to change and inclusivity. As the success of the program grew, so did the challenges. Both Amara and Karen found themselves working long hours, constantly refining and expanding the curriculum to meet the diverse needs of their growing client base. One evening, as they met to review the latest feedback and plan the next phase of the program, Amara noticed Karen looking unusually tired. "Everything okay, Mrs. Whitman?" Amara asked, concern evident in her voice. Karen sighed, rubbing her temples. "Just feeling a bit overwhelmed, I suppose. The program's success is wonderful, but it's also bringing new pressures. Some of our clients are pushing for faster results, and I'm worried we might be sacrificing depth for speed." Amara nodded thoughtfully. "I've been having similar concerns. We need to be careful not to let the program become a superficial checkbox exercise. Real change takes time and sustained effort." They spent the next few hours brainstorming ways to address these challenges. They discussed implementing long-term follow-up strategies, creating peer support networks within organizations, and developing more advanced modules for those who had completed the initial training. As they wrapped up their meeting, both women felt reinvigorated. The challenges they faced were signs of their success, indicators that their work was making a real impact. "You know," Karen said as they were packing up, "I never would have imagined that day in the coffee shop would lead to all this. I'm grateful, in a way. Not for my actions, of course, but for the opportunity it created for growth and change." Amara smiled, feeling a similar sense of amazement at their journey. It's a powerful reminder that even our mistakes can lead to positive change if we're willing to learn and do the work. As they parted ways that evening, both Amara and Karen felt a renewed sense of purpose. They knew the road ahead would continue to be challenging, but they were committed to the journey. Their work was not just about changing individual minds, but about reshaping entire organizational cultures and ultimately contributing to a more just and equitable society. The impact of their program continued to grow, reaching beyond law, firms and government agencies to touch various sectors of society. Schools began implementing modified versions of the training for students and teachers. Community organizations used elements of the program to foster better understanding between diverse groups. Amara and Karen found themselves increasingly in the public eye, invited to speak at conferences, interviewed by media outlets, and consulted by policymakers. While the attention was sometimes overwhelming, they recognized it as an opportunity to spread their message even further. One particularly memorable moment came when they were invited to testify before a congressional committee on improving community police relations. As they sat side by side at the witness table, Amara and Karen exchanged a glance, both acutely aware of how far they had come from that day in the coffee shop. The congressional hearing room buzzed with anticipation as Amara Johnson and Karen Whitman took their seats at the witness table. The room was packed with legislators, media, and members of the public, all eager to hear from the women who had become unexpected discrimination. Senator Maria Rodriguez, the committee chair, called the hearing to order. "Today, we are here to discuss strategies for improving community police relations, with a particular focus on addressing racial bias in law enforcement. We are honored to have with us Ms. Amara Johnson and Mrs. Karen Whitman, whose innovative diversity and inclusion program has gained national attention." As Amara began her opening statement, she felt the weight of the moment. This was an opportunity to influence policy at the highest levels, to potentially shape the future of law enforcement in the country. "Distinguished members of the committee," Amara began, her voice clear and confident, "the program we've developed is not just about sensitivity training or political correctness. It's about making our communities safer and our law enforcement more effective. By addressing unconscious biases and fostering genuine understanding between diverse groups, we can create a system where police and citizens work work together rather than view each other with suspicion and fear. She went on to outline the key elements of their program, emphasizing the importance of ongoing education and practical, real-world applications of the principles they taught. As she spoke, Amara could see heads nodding among the committee members, their expressions thoughtful and engaged. When it was Karen's turn to speak, she took a deep breath, reminding herself of how far she had come. My journey with this program began from a place of ignorance and fear, she admitted, her voice slightly shaky but growing stronger as she continued. I was the person who called the police on Ms. Johnson simply for existing in a space where I didn't think she belonged. My actions that day could have had tragic consequences, but thanks to Ms. Johnson's grace and the transformative power of education, that moment became the catalyst for change, not just for me, but for countless others through our program. Karen went on to describe the impact of the program in various organizations, from law firms to tech companies to community groups. She shared stories of changed perspectives, of bridges built between diverse communities, of workplace cultures transformed. As the senators began their questioning, it became clear that while there was significant interest in the program, there was also skepticism from some quarters. Senator John Bradley, known for his conservative views, leaned forward with a frown. Ms. Johnson, Mrs. Whitman, while your intentions seem admirable, I'm concerned that this program might be promoting a victimhood mentality or unfairly demonizing law enforcement. How do you respond to those concerns? Amara met the senator's gaze steadily. Senator, our program does neither of those things. We're not about assigning blame or promoting victimhood. We're about understanding. We bring law enforcement and community members together, fostering dialogue and shared experiences. Officers who've gone through our program report feeling better, equipped to serve diverse communities, leading to improved community relations and more effective policing. Karen added, if I may, Senator, as someone who once held similar concerns, I can assure you that this program doesn't demonize anyone. It challenges all of us to examine our assumptions and biases, including those held by minority communities. The goal is to create mutual understanding and respect. As the hearing continued, Amara and Karen found themselves fielding questions on everything from the specifics of their curriculum to the measurable outcomes of their program. They spoke of reduced complaints against police officers in departments that had implemented their training, of increased diversity in hiring and promotion in corporations that had embraced their approach, of improved academic performance in schools that had adapted their methods. Towards the end of the hearing, Senator Rodriguez posed a final question. Ms. Johnson, Mrs. Whitman, if you could implement one policy change at the federal level to address racial bias and improve community relations, what would it be? Amara and Karen exchanged a glance, a mutual understanding passing between them. It was Amara who answered, Senator, while our program has shown significant success, we believe that addressing racial bias requires a systemic approach. We would advocate for mandatory, comprehensive bias training for all federal employees, particularly those in law enforcement and public-facing roles. But crucially, this training must be ongoing, not a one-time seminar. It should be coupled with clear accountability measures and regular assessment of outcomes. Karen nodded in agreement. Additionally, we believe there needs to be a federal grant program to support community-led initiatives that foster dialogue and understanding between diverse groups. Change is most effective when it comes from within community. As the hearing concluded, both women felt a sense of cautious optimism. They had been heard, their ideas seriously considered at the highest levels of government. Whether this would translate into concrete policy changes remained to be seen, but it was a significant step forward. In the days following the hearing, Amara and Karen found themselves at the center of a media whirlwind. Their testimony had sparked a national conversation about addressing racial bias in law enforcement and beyond. News programs dissected their proposals, pundits debated the merits of their approach, and their inbox was flooded with messages from supporters and critics alike. Amidst the flurry of attention, Amara received an unexpected call from Director Thompson at the CIA. Johnson, I just watched your testimony, he said, his tone unreadable. You've stirred up quite a hornet's nest. Amara felt a moment of apprehension. Had she overstepped, revealed too much about her work with the agency? But then the director continued, and I couldn't be prouder. Your work is making waves, not just in the civilian world, but within the intelligence community as well. I've been approached by several other agency heads interested in implementing similar programs. Relief washed over Amara, followed by a surge of excitement. The impact of their work was expanding in ways she had never anticipated. Meanwhile, Karen was navigating her own set of challenges. A high-profile testimony had brought renewed attention to her past action, with some questioning whether someone with her history should be leading diversity efforts. One afternoon, as she was leaving her office, Karen was confronted by a small group of protesters. They held signs accusing her of being a fake ally and chanted for her resignation from the diversity program. For a moment, Karen felt a familiar wave of shame and defensiveness rising within her. But then she remembered the lessons she had learned, the growth she had undergone. Instead of retreating or lashing out, she approached the group. "I understand your anger," she said calmly, looking each protester in the eye. "You're right to be skeptical of me, given my past actions. I don't ask for your forgiveness or even your trust. All I ask is that you judge our program by its results, not by my history. If you have specific concerns or suggestions for how we can do better, I'm more than willing to listen." Her unexpected response seemed to catch the protesters off guard. While some remained hostile, others appeared willing to engage in dialogue. Karen spent the next hour in an impromptu discussion with the group, listening to their concerns and explaining the work she and Amara had been doing. By the end of the conversation, while not everyone was convinced, the tone had shifted. One of the protesters, a young woman named Tasha, even asked for information about how to get involved with the program. As Karen finally headed home that evening, she felt drained but also oddly invigorated. The confrontation had been difficult, but it had also reinforced her commitment to the work. She knew there would always be those who doubted her sincerity or questioned her right to be involved in diversity efforts, but she was determined to let her actions speak louder than her past mistakes. Over the next few months, Amara and Karen found themselves busier than ever. The congressional hearing had opened new doors, bringing opportunities to influence policy at state and federal levels. They were invited to consult on police reform initiatives, to advise corporations on creating more inclusive workplaces, and to speak at universities about fostering diverse and equitable campus environments. One particularly challenging project came when they were asked to develop a training program for immigration officers. The goal was to address bias in the processing of asylum seekers and to improve interactions with immigrant communities. As they began researching and developing the curriculum, Amara and Karen realized the complexity of the task before them. They were dealing with deeply ingrained institutional practices, complex international relations, and a political climate that often vilified immigrants. "We need to approach this carefully," Amara said during one of their planning sessions. "We're not just dealing with individual biases here, but with systemic issues and political pressures." Karen nodded in agreement. "And we need to be prepared for significant pushback. There are those who will see any attempt to address bias in immigration enforcement as a threat to national security." They decided to bring in additional experts, including immigration lawyers, human rights advocates, and even former immigration officers who had become critical of the system. They also reached out to immigrant communities, conducting listening sessions to better understand their experiences and concerns. The resulting program, it included modules on cultural competence, trauma-informed interviewing techniques, and the historical and geopolitical contexts of various immigrant groups. They also incorporated simulations and role-playing exercises to help officers practice applying these concepts in real-world scenarios. When they first presented the program to a group of senior immigration officials, the reception was mixed. Some were openly hostile, viewing the training as unnecessary political correctness. Others seemed cautiously interested, recognizing the potential benefits of improved community relations and more accurate assessments of asylum claims. One official, a gruff man named Frank, who had been with the agency for over 2 decades, was particularly vocal in his skepticism. "This all sounds nice in theory," he said, his tone dismissive. "But in the real world, we need to make quick judgments to keep our country safe. We don't have time for all this cultural sensitivity nonsense." Amara met his gaze steadily. "Agent Frank, may I ask how many languages you speak?" Taken aback by the question, Frank answered, "Just English." "Why? And in your 20 years with the agency, how many times have you had to rely on translators or cultural liaisons to do your job effectively?" Frank shifted uncomfortably. "Well, quite often, I suppose. That's exactly why this training is crucial, Amara explained. It's not about political correctness. It's about giving you the tools to do your job more effectively. Understanding cultural nuances can help you detect inconsistencies in stories, recognize genuine fear versus coached responses, and build trust with communities that might have vital information. Karen added, and let's not forget, making more accurate assessments means we're better able to identify real threats while not wasting resources on those who pose no danger. It's about smart, effective enforcement, not just being nice. Their words seemed to strike a chord, not just with Frank, but with many of the other officials as well. By the end of the presentation, there was a palpable shift in the room. While not everyone was fully convinced, there was a growing recognition of the potential value of the program. Over the next year, as the program was implemented across various immigration offices, Amara and Karen closely monitored its impact. They conducted surveys, analyzed data on asylum decisions and community complaints, and held regular check-ins with officers and immigrant advocates. The results were encouraging. Officers who had gone through the program reported feeling more confident in their assessments. There was a decrease in complaints about biased treatment, and community leaders noted improved relations with local immigration offices. Perhaps most significantly, there was an increase in the identification of genuine asylum cases, along with more accurate flagging of potential security risks. One day, as Amara and Karen were reviewing the latest data from the immigration program, they received an unexpected visitor. It was Frank, the initially skeptical official from their first presentation. "I owe you both an apology," he said, his gruff demeanor softened by genuine emotion. "I thought this program was going to be a waste of time, but it's changed the way I do my job. Last week I interviewed an asylum seeker from a country I knew almost nothing about. Thanks to your training, I picked up on cultural cues that led me to dig deeper into her story. Turns out she had crucial information about a human trafficking ring. We would have missed it entirely before." Frank's story was just one of many that began to pour in, illustrating the real-world impact of their work. Amara and Karen felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that their program was not just changing minds, but potentially saving lives. As word of their success spread, they began receiving inquiries from immigration agencies in other countries. The potential for international impact was exciting, but also daunting. They would need to adapt their program to vastly different cultural contexts and legal systems. "We're going to need help," Amara said to Karen one evening as they poured over. "Requests from agencies in Europe, Australia, and South America. We can't do this alone anymore." Karen nodded in agreement. "It's time to expand our team. We need to bring in experts from different countries, people who understand the local contexts." Over the next few months, they embarked on a careful process of building an international team. They sought out academics, former immigration officials, and community leaders from various countries, looking for individuals who shared their vision of compassionate, effective immigration practices. As their team grew, so did the scope of their work. They began developing country-specific modules, taking into account local laws, cultural norms, and specific immigration challenges. They also started hoping to create a framework that could be adapted to different contexts around the world. The work was challenging and often emotionally taxing. They dealt with heart-wrenching stories of refugees fleeing war and persecution, of families torn apart by deportation, of communities living in fear. But they also encountered stories of hope, of successful integration, of lives rebuilt and dreams realized. One particularly memorable moment came during a training session in Berlin. They had been working with German immigration officials, helping them navigate the challenges of the ongoing refugee crisis. During a break, one of the participants, a young officer named Lena, approached Amara and Karen with tears in her eyes. "I joined this agency because I wanted to help people," Lena said, her voice choked with emotion. "But lately, I felt so overwhelmed, so unsure of how to balance compassion with our security needs. Your program has given me hope that we can do both. Thank you." Moments like these kept Amara and Karen going, even when the work seemed overwhelming. They were making a difference, not just in individual lives, but in the way entire systems operated. As their international work expanded, they found themselves traveling frequently, crisscrossing the globe to conduct trainings and consult with government agencies. The work was exhausting but exhilarating. One evening, as they sat in a cafe in Sydney after a long day of meetings with Australian immigration officials, Karen turned to Amara with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about that day in the coffee shop?" she asked. "How differently things could have turned out." Amara nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I do. It's amazing how a moment of conflict turned into all of this." She gestured broadly, encompassing not just their current location but the global scope of their work. "I'm not proud of my actions that day," Karen said softly, "but I'm proud of what we've built from it. We're really making a difference, aren't we?" "We are," Amara agreed, "but we've still got a long way to go." As they sat there, watching the sunset over Sydney Harbour, both women felt a sense of purpose and determination. Their journey had taken them further than they ever could have imagined, from a tense confrontation in a local coffee shop to influencing immigration policies around the world. They knew the road ahead would continue to be challenging. There would always be those resistant to change, those who clung to their biases and fears. But Amara and Karen were committed to the work, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they finished their coffee and prepared to head back to their hotel, Amara's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Director Thompson at the CIA. "Johnson, I need you back in Washington ASAP. We've got a situation that requires your unique expertise, both in the field and with your diversity work. How soon can you be here?" Amara showed the message to Karen, who nodded understanding. "Go," she said. "I can handle things here. Just be careful, okay?" As Amara packed her bags that night, preparing for an early flight back to Washington, she reflected on the dual nature of her work. On one hand, she was helping to reshape immigration policies and combat bias around the world. On the other, she was still very much an active CIA agent, dealing with threats to national security. The contrast might have seemed stark to some, but to Amara, it all felt interconnected. Her work on diversity and inclusion made her a better intelligence officer, more attuned to cultural nuances and better able to build trust across diverse communities. And her intelligence work gave her insights into global issues that informed her approach to immigration and bias training. As she drifted off to sleep, Amara felt a sense of anticipation. Whatever challenge awaited her in Washington, she knew she was ready to face it, and she knew that the work she and Karen were doing was making the world a little bit better, one mind at a time. The flight from Sydney to Washington, D.C. was long and tiring, but Amara Johnson's mind was racing with possibilities. Director Thompson's cryptic message had piqued her curiosity, and she found herself wondering what kind of situation could require both her field skills and her expertise in diversity training. As the plane touched down at Dulles International Airport, Amara felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with every new mission. She quickly made her way through customs, her CIA credentials, ensuring a smooth passage, and found a car waiting to take her directly to Langley. The CIA headquarters was bustling with activity even at this early hour. Amara was immediately ushered into a secure briefing room where Director Thompson was waiting, along with several other high-ranking officials she didn't recognize. "Agent Johnson," Thompson greeted her, his face grave. "We have a situation that requires your unique skill set." Amara took a seat at the table, her posture alert and ready. "I'm here to help in any way I can, sir. What's the situation?" Thompson nodded to one of the other officials, who began distributing folders marked top secret. "We've uncovered a domestic terrorist cell with international connections," Thompson explained as Amara opened her folder. "What makes this group particularly dangerous is their ability to recruit from diverse communities, often exploiting cultural misunderstandings and societal tensions." Amara's eyes widened as she scanned the documents before her. The cell appeared to be comprised of individuals from various ethnic and religious backgrounds, all united by a shared ideology of extremism and anti-government sentiment. "Our traditional infiltration methods have been unsuccessful," another official chimed in. "They're extremely cautious and seem to have a sixth sense for identifying outsiders." "That's where you come in, Agent Johnson." Amara looked up from the files, meeting the director's gaze. "You want me to go undercover undercover? Thompson nodded. Not just undercover, Johnson. We need you to design and implement a comprehensive strategy, one that will allow us to infiltrate this group while also addressing the root causes that make their recruitment so effective. The implications of what they were asking began to sink in. This wasn't just another field operation. They were essentially asking her to apply her diversity and inclusion work to counter terrorism in real time. It's a tall order, I know, Thompson continued, sensing her hesitation. But you've proven that your approach can change minds and bridge divides. We need that now more than ever. Amara took a deep breath, her mind already starting to formulate strategies. I'll need a team, she said, people with various cultural backgrounds who've been through my training program, and I'll need access to community leaders in the areas where this cell is operating. Thompson nodded approvingly. You'll have whatever resources you need. This operation is top priority. As the briefing continued, Amara learned more about the cell's operations and recruitment tactics. They were sophisticated, using social media and community events to identify vulnerable individuals who felt marginalized or disenfranchised. Their message of belonging and purpose was particularly appealing to young people struggling to find their place in society. We can't just dismantle this cell, Amara mused aloud as the briefing wound down. We need to address the conditions that make their message appealing in the first place. Exactly, Thompson agreed. That's why we need your expertise, Johnson. We're not just looking to make arrests. We want to create lasting change in these communities. As Amara left the briefing room, her mind was already working overtime. This mission would require her to draw on everything she had learned, both as a CIA agent and through her work with Karen on the diversity program. Over the next few weeks, Amara threw herself into the operation. She assembled a team of agents who had been through her diversity training, each bringing unique cultural insights and skills to the table. Together, they began to craft a multifaceted approach to infiltrating the terrorist cell and undermining its influence. One key aspect of their strategy involved partnering with community leaders and organizations. Amara reached out to trusted contacts, carefully explaining the situation and enlisting their help in identifying at-risk individuals and providing alternative support systems. We're not asking you to spy on your communities, Amara explained. During a meeting with a group of religious and civic leaders, we're asking for your help in protecting vulnerable people from those who would exploit them, and we want to work with you to address the underlying issues that make extremist messages appealing. Many of the leaders were initially skeptical, wary of government interference, and concerned about potential backlash. But Amara's sincerity and her track record with the diversity program helped to build trust. Slowly but surely, a network of community allies began to form. As the operation progressed, Amara found herself constantly balancing her roles as an undercover agent and a community advocate. She attended local events, volunteered at community centers, and gradually began to make contact with individuals on the fringes of the terrorist cell. One such individual was Jamal, a young man in his early 20s who had been identified as a potential recruit for the cell. Amara arranged to meet him at a local coffee shop, her heart racing as she thought about the parallels to her encounter with Karen so long ago. Jamal arrived looking nervous and defensive, his eyes darting around the cafe as if expecting trouble. Amara smiled warmly, offering him a cup of coffee. Jamal, she said, her voice gentle but confident. I know you probably have a lot of questions about why I wanted to talk to you. Jamal nodded warily, his hands wrapped tightly around his coffee cup. Are you with the government? He asked bluntly. Amara had prepared for this question. In situations like these, honesty, even partial honesty, was crucial for building trust. I work with a community outreach program, she said, which was true as far as it went. We're concerned about some of the messages young people in this community have been receiving, and we want to offer support and alternatives. Over the next hour, Amara listened more than she talked. She heard Jamal's frustrations with discrimination, his struggle to find meaningful employment, his sense of alienation from both his family's traditional culture and mainstream American society. She recognized in his words the same feelings of isolation and anger that the terrorist cell exploited in its recruitment. As their conversation drew to a close, Amara didn't push for any commitments from Jamal. Instead, she offered resources, mentorship programs, job training opportunities. You have so much potential, Jamal, she said earnestly. I'd hate to see it wasted or used by those who don't have your best interests at heart. Jamal left the cafe looking thoughtful, the defensive tension in his shoulders slightly relaxed. Amara knew this was just the first step in a long process, but it was a start. Over the following months, Amara and her team continued their work, slowly infiltrating the edges of the terrorist cell, while simultaneously building a network of support and alternatives for vulnerable community members. It was painstaking, often frustrating work, with progress measured in inches rather than miles. There were setbacks along the way. One of Amara's team members was nearly exposed during a tense encounter with a high-ranking cell member. Another time, a promising young contact suddenly cut off all communication, leaving the team fearing he had fully joined the cell. But there were victories too. Jamal, the young man from the cafe, not only turned away from the cell's influence, but became an ally, helping to steer other young people towards positive alternatives. Community leaders who had initially been skeptical became enthusiastic partners, working with Amara's team to develop programs that addressed the root causes of alienation and extremism. As the operation progressed, Amara found herself drawing more and more on the principles she had developed with Karen in their diversity program. The skills of active listening, of recognizing and addressing unconscious biases, of building bridges across cultural divides, all proved invaluable in her undercover work. One evening, as Amara was preparing a report for Director Thompson, she received an unexpected call. It was Karen, sounding excited and a bit breathless. "Amara, I hope I'm not interrupting anything classified," Karen began, "but I had to share this with you. Remember that immigration official in Berlin, Lena? She just contacted me. The program we implemented there has led to a 30% increase in successful asylum cases and a significant improvement in community relations. They're calling it a model for immigration reform across the EU." Despite her exhaustion from the long days of undercover work, Amara felt a surge of joy at the news. "That's incredible, Karen. Your work there is making a real difference." "Our work," Karen corrected her warmly. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. How are things on your end? I know you can't give me details, but are you okay?" Amara sighed, feeling the weight of her dual roles. "It's challenging," she admitted, "but I think we're making progress. The skills we developed in our program, they're proving invaluable here. You wouldn't believe how much our diversity training applies to counter-terrorism." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Karen spoke again, her voice was soft with concern. "Just be careful, okay? I know the work you're doing is important, but so are you." After ending the call, Amara sat back in her chair, a small smile playing on her lips. So much had changed since that day in the coffee shop. Yet here they were, still supporting each other, still working towards a common goal of understanding and inclusion. The next morning, Amara was called into an emergency meeting with Director Thompson. The atmosphere in the briefing room was tense, and Amara immediately sensed that something significant had happened. "We've received intelligence that the cell is planning a major attack," Thompson said without preamble. "We don't have all the details yet, but it appears to be scheduled for the next 72 hours. Amara felt her heart rate quicken. After months of careful work, building relationships and trust, they were suddenly on a critical time crunch. "What do we know?" she asked, her mind already racing. Thompson gestured to the screens on the wall, which filled with maps and surveillance photo. "We've identified several key players, thanks in large part to your team's work, but we're still missing crucial details about the target and the exact timing." Amara studied the information before her, recognizing faces she had encountered during her undercover work. She felt a complex mix of emotion, determination to stop the attack, warring with a sense of sadness for the individuals she had come to know, misguided though they were. "We need to move carefully," she said, looking around at the grim faces of her colleagues. "If we go in too aggressively, we risk not only missing critical information, but also potentially alienating the communities we've been working with. That could set our efforts back years." There were murmurs of both agreement and dissent around the room. One senior agent spoke up, his voice gruff with frustration. "With all due respect, Agent Johnson, we don't have time for kid gloves. We need to round up everyone associated with this cell now. now. Amara shook her head firmly. That's exactly the kind of response they're anticipating. It plays right into their narrative of government oppression. We need to be smarter than that. For the next several hours, Amara and her team worked feverishly to develop a strategy that would allow them to thwart the attack without undoing all the community trust they had built. They reached out to their network of community leaders, carefully sharing select information and asking for their support in identifying the most likely targets. As the deadline drew nearer, the pressure mounted. Amara found herself working around the clock, coordinating with local law enforcement, analyzing intelligence reports, and continuing to engage with community contacts. It was during one such late-night meeting with a trusted community leader that Amara received the breakthrough they needed. The leader, an imam named Yusuf, who had been instrumental in their outreach efforts, arrived at the secure location looking troubled. "Agent Johnson," he said, his voice heavy with concern, "one of my congregation members came to me with disturbing information. His nephew has been acting strangely, talking about making a grand statement. He feared the boy might be involved with extremists but was afraid to go to the authorities." Amara listened intently as Yusuf shared the details. The nephew, a 19-year-old named Tariq, had recently lost his job and had become increasingly isolated. He had been seen meeting with known members of the terrorist cell and had recently purchased materials that could be used to make explosives. "Thank you for bringing this to me, Imam Yusuf," Amara said earnestly. "You may have just saved many lives. Can you tell me where Tariq is now?" Yusuf provided an address, a small apartment in a crowded neighborhood known for its diverse immigrant population. As soon as he left, Amara sprang into action, mobilizing her team while also ensuring that the response would be measured and targeted. "We go in quiet," she instructed her team as they prepared for the operation. "No massive show of force. We're here to prevent an attack and to save lives, including Tariq's if we can." As they approached the apartment building, Amara felt the familiar tension that preceded any high-stakes operation. But she also felt something else, a sense of purpose that went beyond just stopping a terrorist attack. She was fighting not just against extremism, but for the very communities these extremists claimed to represent. The team moved swiftly and silently up the stairs, taking up positions around Tariq's apartment. Amara took a deep breath, then knocked on the door. "Tariq, this is Amara. I'm here to help. We know about the attack you're planning, but it's not too late to stop this." There was a long moment of silence, then the sound of movement inside the apartment. Amara held her breath, acutely aware of the danger they were all in if Tariq had already assembled his explosives. Finally, a shaky voice came from behind the door. "How do I know I can trust you?" Amara thought quickly, drawing on everything she had learned about Tariq's background and motivations. "Your uncle Yusuf sent me," she said softly. "He's worried about you, Tariq. We all are. I know you feel like this is your only option, but it's not. There are people who want to help you, who understand your frustrations. Please, let's talk about this." Another long pause, then the sound of locks being undone. The door opened slowly, revealing a young man looking scared and confused. Amara entered the apartment cautiously, signaling her team to stay back. The room was cluttered with electronics and various chemicals, clear evidence of bomb-making preparations. But nothing seemed to be assembled yet. "Tariq," Amara said gently, "I know you're angry. I know you feel like society has turned its back on you. You have so much potential, so much to offer. Don't throw your life away for a cause that's only using you." As she spoke, she could see the conflict in Tariq's eyes. The anger and determination warred with fear and uncertainty. Slowly, hesitantly, he began to talk, pouring out his frustrations, his sense of alienation, the seductive promise of purpose the terrorist cell had offered him. Amara listened patiently, recognizing in his words echoes of so many others she had encountered, both in her CIA work and through the diversity program. When Tariq finally fell silent, tears streaming down his face, Amara spoke again. "Tariq, I can't promise you that everything will be easy from here on out, but I can promise you that there are people who want to help you, who believe in you. Will you let us try?" For a long moment, Tariq stood frozen, his eyes darting between Amara and the material scattered around his apartment. Then, slowly, he nodded. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. activity. Bomb disposal experts carefully removed the dangerous materials from Tariq's apartment. Amara's team worked to track down the other members of the cell based on the information Tariq provided, and Amara herself stayed with Tariq, talking him through what would happen next, assuring him that cooperation would be taken into account. As dawn broke, Amara finally had a moment to step back and take stock of the situation. The immediate threat had been neutralized. Several key members of the terrorist cell were in custody, and perhaps most importantly, a young man had been pulled back from the brink of making a terrible mistake. But Amara knew that this was just the beginning. The real work, the long-term effort to address the root causes that led to such radicalization, was still ahead. As she prepared to debrief Director Thompson, Amara's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Karen. Saw the news about the foiled attack. I know you can't share details, but I hope you're okay. Remember what we're doing, it's making a difference. One mind at a time. Amara smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, there was still much work to be done, but together they were changing the world, one mind at a time. In the weeks following the foiled terrorist attack, Amara Johnson found herself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. The successful operation had not only prevented a tragedy, but had also validated her approach to counter-terrorism, one that emphasized community engagement and addressing root causes over purely punitive measures. Director Thompson called Amara into his office for a debriefing session that stretched into hours. As they pored over the details of the operation, analyzing what had worked and what could be improved, Thompson's expression grew increasingly thoughtful. "Johnson," he said finally, leaning back in his chair, "I have to admit, when you first proposed this approach, I had my doubts. But you've proven that understanding and inclusion can be powerful tools in our arsenal. I think it's time we considered implementing your methods on a broader scale." Amara felt a surge of excitement at his words. This was an opportunity to effect real change within the agency, to shift the paradigm of how they approached not just counter-terrorism, but all of their operations. "I'm glad you see the potential, sir," she replied, her mind already racing with possibilities. "But to truly implement this approach effectively, we'd need to make some significant changes in our training and recruitment processes." Thompson nodded, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I was hoping you'd say that, Johnson, because I'm not just talking about implementing your methods. I'm talking about creating a new division within the CIA focused on community engagement and cultural intelligence, and I want you to lead it." Amara's eyes widened in surprise. This was far beyond anything she had anticipated. A new division would mean resources, personnel, the ability to shape policy at the highest level. But it would also mean stepping back from field work, from the hands-on engagement that had been so crucial to her success. "This is a tremendous opportunity, sir," she said carefully, "but I have some concerns. A lot of what makes our approach effective is the direct personal engagement with communities. I wouldn't want to lose that by getting bogged down in bureaucracy." Thompson leaned forward, his expression serious. "I understand your concerns, Johnson, and I agree that maintaining that personal touch is crucial. That's why I'm proposing a dual role for you. You'd oversee the new division, shaping policy and training, but you'd also continue to be our point person for high-priority community engagement operations. It's a lot to ask, I know, but I believe you're the right person for the job." As Amara left the director's office, her mind was reeling with the implications of this new promotion, the recognition of her work. But instead, she felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach. How could she balance the demands of running a new division with the intensive personal work of community engagement? And how would this affect her ongoing collaboration with Karen and their diversity program? Over the next few days, as she mulled over the director's offer, Amara found herself increasingly torn. The potential to effect change on a large scale was tempting, but she worried about becoming disconnected from the very communities she was trying to serve. It was during this period of uncertainty that Amara received an unexpected call from Karen. Her former adversary-turned-partner was calling from a conference in Geneva, where she had been presenting their diversity program to an international audience. "Amara," Karen's voice crackled over the line, filled with excitement, "you won't believe the response we're getting here. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights wants to adapt our program for peacekeeping operations, and the International Red Cross is interested in incorporating our methods into their cultural sensitivity training. This is going global, Amara. As Karen continued to share the overwhelmingly positive reception their program was receiving, Amara felt a mix of pride and wistfulness. Their work was making a real difference, reaching far beyond what either of them had initially imagined. But with her new responsibilities at the CIA looming, Amara wondered how much she would be able to continue participating in the program's expansion. "That's incredible news, Karen," Amara said when her partner finally paused for breath. "I'm so proud of what we've accomplished, but I have to tell you, things are changing on my end too." She proceeded to fill Karen in on Director Thompson's offer, explaining the potential impact of the new division, but also her reservations about taking on such a high-level administrative role. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Karen spoke. "Amara, this is an amazing opportunity. Think of the changes you could make, the lives you could impact. But I understand your hesitation. Our work together, the direct engagement with communities, that's the heart of what we do." As they continued to discuss the pros and cons, Amara felt some of her uncertainty begin to dissipate. Karen's perspective, coming from outside the insular world of the CIA, helped her see the bigger picture. "Maybe," Karen suggested thoughtfully, "this new role doesn't have to mean giving up the hands-on work. What if you could use your position to create more opportunities for direct community engagement throughout the agency? You could train a whole new generation of agents to approach their work with cultural intelligence and empathy." The idea resonated with Amara. She had been so focused on how the new role might limit her that she hadn't fully considered how it could amplify her impact. By shaping policy and training at the highest levels, she could potentially influence every operation the CIA undertook. As the call with Karen wound down, Amara felt a renewed sense of purpose. "Thank you, Karen," she said warmly. "You've helped me see this opportunity in a new light. It's amazing how far we've come from that day in the coffee shop, isn't it?" Karen laughed softly. "It certainly is. Who would have thought that my misguided suspicion would lead to all of this? We're changing the world, Amara, one mind at a time." After ending the call, Amara sat at her desk for a long moment, reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. From that tense confrontation in the coffee shop, to preventing a terrorist attack, to now being offered a chance to reshape the CIA's approach to community engagement, it was almost overwhelming. With a deep breath, Amara reached for her phone and dialed Director Thompson's number. When he answered, her voice was clear and confident. "Sir, I've made my decision. I'd like to accept the position, but with a few conditions. I want to ensure that community engagement remains at the forefront of our approach, not just in theory, but in practice. And I'd like to continue collaborating with external partners, including the diversity program I've been working on." Thompson's response was immediate and positive. "I'm glad to hear it, Johnson. I think we can work with those conditions. In fact, I believe they'll make the new division even more effective. When can you start?" The next few months were a whirlwind of activity as Amara worked to establish the new division of community engagement and cultural intelligence within the CIA. She assembled a team of agents and analysts who shared her vision, drawing from a diverse pool of talent both within and outside the agency. One of her first initiatives was to create a comprehensive training program for all CIA operatives, focusing on cultural competence, bias recognition to intelligence gathering. She drew heavily on the curriculum she and Karen had developed, adapting it to the specific needs of the intelligence community. The program faced resistance from some quarters, particularly from older, more traditional agents who viewed it as unnecessary hand-holding. But Amara was prepared for this pushback. She organized workshops where agents who had successfully used community engagement techniques in the field shared their experiences, demonstrating how these approaches had led to better intelligence and more successful operations. Gradually, she began to see a shift in attitudes. Younger agents, in particular, embraced the new methodologies enthusiastically. They saw the value in building trust within communities, in understanding the cultural context of the regions where they operated. One particularly rewarding moment came when Amara received a report from a field agent in Southeast Asia. The agent had used techniques from the new training program to build relationships within a community that had previously been hostile to any government presence. Through these connections, they had uncovered a human trafficking operation that local authorities had been struggling to track for years. "Your training saved lives," lives, the agent wrote in their report. Not just by helping us shut down this operation, but by showing us how to work with the community instead of against it. We're not just gathering intelligence anymore. We're helping to build a safer, more stable environment. As news of successes like these spread, Amara found that resistance to her methods began to wane. Even some of the initially skeptical senior agents started to come around, recognizing the value of her approach in an increasingly complex global landscape. But Amara's new role wasn't without its challenges. The demands on her time were intense, often requiring her to juggle high-level policy meetings with hands-on community engagement work. There were nights when she barely slept, days when she felt stretched to her limits. It was during one of these particularly stressful periods that Amara received an unexpected visitor at her office. Karen had flown in from a training session in Europe, concerned about the toll the new position might be taking on her friend and partner. Amara, Karen said, taking in the dark circles under the other woman's eyes and the cluttered state of her usually immaculate office. You're doing amazing work here, but you can't keep pushing yourself like this. You need to delegate more, to trust your team. Amara sighed, running a hand through her hair. I know. It's just there's so much to do, so many changes to implement, and I feel like if I'm not personally overseeing everything, something might slip through the cracks. Karen nodded, understanding. I get it, but remember what we always tell participants in our program. Change is a process, not an event. You've set things in motion here, Amara. Now you need to give it time to take root and grow. As they talked, Amara felt some of the tension she'd been carrying start to ease. Karen's presence was a reminder of how far they'd come, of the impact they'd already made. It helped her regain perspective on the larger goals of her work. Taking Karen's advice to heart, Amara began to focus more on empowering her team, on creating systems that could function effectively without her constant oversight. She instituted regular feedback sessions, encouraging her staff to share their ideas and concerns openly. She also made a point of carving out time for her own continued education and self-care, recognizing that she couldn't lead effectively if she was running on empty. As these changes took effect, Amara found that not only did the division run more smoothly, but her own work became more focused and impactful. She was able to devote more energy to high-level strategy and to the crucial task of building bridges between the CIA and the communities it served. One of Amara's most ambitious projects during this period was the creation of a community advisory board. This group, composed of leaders from various ethnic, religious, and cultural communities across the country, would provide input on CIA policies and operations that might impact their communities. The idea faced significant opposition from some quarters within the agency. There were concerns about security, about the potential for classified information to be compromised, but Amara stood firm, arguing that the benefits of improved community relations and more culturally informed decision-making far outweighed the potential risks. We're not sharing operational details with this board, she explained in a tense meeting with senior agency officials. We're giving communities a voice in how we approach our work. We're building trust, which in the long run will make our job easier and our intelligence more reliable. After weeks, the Community Advisory Board held its first meeting. As Amara looked around the table at the diverse group of leaders, she felt a sense of pride and hope. This was a tangible manifestation of the changes she was working to implement, a step towards a more inclusive and effective approach to national security. The board's impact became evident almost immediately. During discussions about a potential operation in a predominantly Muslim neighborhood, one of the board members, an imam, pointed out cultural nuances that the planning team had overlooked. His insights led to a significant revision of the operation plan, ultimately resulting in a more successful and less disruptive mission. As word of the board's effectiveness spread, Amara began receiving inquiries from other government agencies interested in implementing similar programs. She found herself increasingly in demand as a speaker and consultant, sharing her approach to community engagement and cultural intelligence with a wider audience. One afternoon, as Amara was preparing preparing for a presentation to the National Security Council. She received a call from Director Thompson. His voice was grave as he explained the situation. A crisis was unfolding in a small Middle Eastern country with potential global ramifications. The CIA's involvement would be crucial, but the situation was delicate, requiring a nuanced understanding of the region's complex cultural and political dynamics. Johnson, Thompson said, I need you on this, not just in an advisory capacity, but on the ground. Your expertise in community engagement could be the key to resolving this without escalation. Amara felt a familiar surge of adrenaline at the prospect of fieldwork, mixed with a twinge of apprehension. She had grown accustomed to her administrative role, to the relative safety of Washington, but she also knew that this was exactly the kind of situation she had been preparing for, the reason she had worked so hard to change the agency's approach. I understand, sir, she replied, her voice steady. When do I leave? As Amara packed for the mission, her mind raced with preparations. She would need to brief her team, ensure the division could run smoothly in her absence. She also reached out to contacts in the region, seeking the most up-to-date information on the local situation. Just before she left for the airport, Amara received a text from Karen. Be safe out there. Remember, you're not just gathering intelligence, you're building bridges. You've got this. With those words of encouragement in mind, Amara boarded the plane, ready to put all she had learned into practice in one of the most challenging environments she had ever faced. As the aircraft took off, she felt a mix of anticipation and determination. This mission would be a true test of her methods, a chance to prove that understanding and inclusion could be powerful tools in even the most volatile situations. The flight was long, giving Amara time to review her briefing materials and refine her strategy. She knew that the success of this mission would depend not just on her intelligence-gathering skills, but on her ability to navigate complex cultural dynamics and build trust quickly in a tense environment. As the plane began its descent into a small, nondescript airport in a neighboring country, Amara took a deep breath, centering herself. She was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, confident in the approach she had developed and the team supporting her back in Washington. Little did she know that this mission would push her skills to the limit, testing not only her professional abilities, but also her personal convictions. The experiences that awaited her would reshape her understanding of her work and its impact on the world in ways she could never have anticipated. The heat hit Amara like a wall as she stepped off the plane onto the tarmac of the small Middle Eastern airport. The air shimmered with mirages, distorting the landscape and giving an otherworldly quality to the scene. As she made her way through customs, Amara's mind was already racing, analyzing every detail of her surroundings and the people she encountered. Her contact, a local CIA asset named Farid, was waiting for her outside the airport. He was a middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed beard and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Welcome, Ms. Johnson, he said in lightly accented English. I hope your journey was comfortable. Amara smiled back, instantly appreciating Farid's warm demeanor. Thank you, Farid. It's good to be here. I'm eager to get started. As they drove through the bustling streets of the capital city, Farid briefed Amara on the latest developments. The situation was even more complex than she had initially been led to believe. The country was teetering on the brink of civil war, with various factions vying for power in the wake of the aging leader's declining health. Is that each group believes they have the only legitimate claim to leadership, and they're all suspicious of outside interference, especially from Western powers. Amara nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. So, we're not just dealing with political tensions, but deep-seated cultural and historical issues as well. Exactly, Farid agreed. And that's why your approach is so crucial. We need to build trust, to show that we're here to help stabilize the situation, not to impose our will. Their first stop was a meeting with a group of moderate political leaders who were trying to broker a peaceful transition of power. As Amara entered the room, she was acutely aware of the skeptical glances cast her way. She was an outsider, a woman, and a representative of a government many here viewed with suspicion. Taking a deep breath, Amara drew on all her training and experience. She began not by talking, but by listening. She asked questions about the leaders' concerns, their hopes for their country, the challenges they faced. Slowly, she saw the tension in the room begin to ease as the men realized she was not there to dictate terms, but to understand. and assist. As the meeting progressed, Amara carefully steered the conversation towards potential solutions. She shared examples of successful power-sharing agreements from other regions, always framing them in the context of local cultural norms and values. One of the older leaders, a man named Hassan, who had been particularly skeptical at the start, spoke up. "Miss Johnson, I must admit, when I heard an American was coming to advise us, I was prepared to dismiss your words. But you have shown a depth of understanding and respect for our ways that is unexpected. Perhaps there is value in this dialogue after all." Amara felt a surge of hope at Hassan's words. It was a small victory, but an important one. As she left the meeting, she knew she had laid the groundwork for further cooperation. Over the next few days, Amara threw herself into a whirlwind of meetings, negotiations, and careful intelligence gathering. She met with religious leaders, youth activists, tribal elders, and government officials. Each encounter presented its own unique challenges, requiring Amara to constantly adapt her approach. One particularly tense moment came during a meeting with a group of young revolutionaries. They were passionate, angry, and deeply distrustful of any government involvement, especially from the United States. As Amara tried to engage them in dialogue, one young man stood up, his eyes flashing with fury. "Why should we listen to you?" he demanded. "Your country has brought nothing but suffering to our region. You claim to want peace, but you only care about your own interests." Amara felt the weight of history in his words, the pain of generations of conflict and misunderstanding. For a moment, she was transported back to that coffee shop, facing Karen's unfounded suspicions. But this was different. This young man's anger was rooted in real grievances, in lived experiences of hardship and loss. Taking a deep breath, Amara spoke softly but firmly. "You're right to be angry. Your pain is valid, and your suspicion is understandable. I'm not here to defend past actions or to tell you what to do. I'm here to listen, to understand, and if possible, to help find a way forward that serves your interests, not mine or my government's." Her words seemed to catch the young man off guard. He had clearly been expecting defensiveness or dismissal. Instead, Amara's acknowledgement of his perspective created an opening for real dialogue. As the meeting continued, Amara encouraged the young activists to share their vision for their country's future. She asked probing questions about how they plan to achieve their goals, gently challenging them to think through the practical implications of their revolutionary ideals. By the end of the session, while tensions were still high, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The young revolutionaries were no longer seeing Amara as simply an enemy to be opposed, but as a potential ally in their quest for positive change. As the days turned into weeks, Amara found herself constantly walking a tightrope between various factions. She was gathering crucial intelligence for the CIA, but she was also working tirelessly to foster dialogue and find common ground between opposing groups. One evening, as she sat in her hotel room reviewing her notes from the day's meetings, Amara received an encrypted message from Director Thompson. The situation back in Washington was growing tense. There were elements within the government pushing for more direct intervention in the country's affairs, arguing that stability was more important than democratic processes. Amara felt her heart sink as she read the message. She knew that heavy-handed intervention would likely backfire, undoing all the delicate work she had been doing to solutions. With trembling fingers, she composed her response, making a passionate case for continued diplomacy and support for moderate local leaders. She provided detailed analysis of the progress being made, the delicate alliances being formed, and the potential long-term benefits of allowing the country to chart its own course with subtle, respectful guidance rather than overt control. As she hit send, Amara said a silent prayer that her words would be heeded. She knew that the next few days would be critical in determining the future of not just this country, but potentially the entire region. The following morning, Amara received word that a secret meeting had been arranged between the leaders of the two main opposing factions. It was a breakthrough she had been working towards for weeks, and she knew that the outcome of this meeting could change everything. As she made her way to the nondescript building where the meeting was to take place, Amara felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She was not just a CIA agent in this moment, but a facilitator, a bridge builder, perhaps even a peacemaker. The meeting was tense from the start. The two leaders, both proud men with decades of enmity between them, could barely look at each each other. Amara began by acknowledging the difficulty of the situation and the courage it had taken for both men to agree to this dialogue. Slowly, carefully, she guided the conversation, drawing on all her skills in conflict resolution and cultural understanding. She encouraged each leader to share their concerns, their hopes for their people, the legacy they wished to leave. Hours passed. There were moments of shouting, of walkouts narrowly averted, of accusations and recriminations. But there were also moments of unexpected connection, of shared memories, of a time before the conflicts began, of mutual concern for the younger generation's future. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, something shifted. The leaders, exhausted but somehow lighter, began to talk about practical steps forward. It wasn't a full resolution, but it was a start, a foundation upon which peace could potentially be built. As Amara left the meeting, she felt a mix of exhilaration and deep fatigue. She had done what she could to set the process in motion, but she knew that the real work was just beginning. Returning to her hotel, Amara found an urgent message waiting for her. Director Thompson needed her to report in immediately. With a sense of trepidation, she set up the secure communication line. Thompson's face appeared on the screen, his expression unreadable. "Johnson, I've just come from a meeting with the President. Your reports, your approach, it's been controversial." Amara felt her heart rate quicken. Had she overstepped? Had her methods been deemed too soft, too slow in a world that often demanded quick, decisive action? But then Thompson's stern expression cracked into a smile. "Controversial, but effective. The President has authorized us to continue supporting your approach. More than that, he wants to use this as a model for future operations in the region." The relief Amara felt was overwhelming. This was validation not just of her work here, but of everything she had been striving for in her new role at the CIA. As she ended the call with Thompson, Amara's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Karen, checking in. "How are things going? Making any progress with your bridge building?" Amara smiled as she typed her reply. "It's challenging, but we're making headway. Amazing how the skills we developed for our diversity program translate to international diplomacy. Miss working with you though." Karen's response came quickly. "Miss you too. But what you're doing there is so important. Just remember, one mind at a time. You're changing the world, Amara." As Amara prepared for bed that night, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From that tense confrontation in a coffee shop to brokering peace talks in the Middle East, it had been an extraordinary path. She thought about Karen, about the unlikely partnership they had formed and the impact they had made together. She thought about Jamal and Tariq, the young men whose lives had been changed by her intervention. She thought about the countless individuals, from CIA agents to community leaders, whose perspectives had been shifted by the programs she had developed. There was still so much work to be done, so many challenges to face. But as Amara drifted off to sleep, she felt a sense of hope. Change was possible. Understanding could be built. Bridges could be crossed. In the weeks that followed, Amara continued her delicate work of diplomacy and intelligence gathering. There were setbacks, moments of frustration when old enmities flared up and threatened to derail the fragile progress. But there were also breakthroughs, small moments of connection. One particularly memorable moment came during a meeting with a group of women activists. They were fighting for greater representation in the new government being formed, facing resistance from conservative elements in society. As Amara listened to their stories, she was struck by their resilience and determination. These women were not asking for outside intervention, but for support in their own struggle for equality. It reminded Amara of the importance of empowering local voices, of supporting indigenous movements for change rather than imposing external solutions. Drawing on her experiences with the diversity program, Amara worked with the women to develop strategies for engaging with traditional leaders, framing their demands in ways that resonated with cultural values while still pushing for progressive change. As the meeting concluded, one of the older women took Amara's hands in hers. "Thank you," she said softly, "not for telling us what to do, but for listening, for understanding. It gives us strength to know we have allies who respect our ways while supporting our dreams." Amara felt a lump in her throat as she squeezed the woman's hand. This, she realized, realized was the true measure of her work's success, not in grand political agreements, but in these human connections, these small seeds of change planted in individual hearts and minds. As her mission in the country drew to a close, Amara could see the tangible results of her efforts. A transitional government was taking shape, one that included voices from various factions and promised a peaceful path to democratic elections. It was far from perfect, and the road ahead would be challenging, but it was a start. In her final briefing to Director Thompson, Amara emphasized the importance of continued engagement, of supporting local initiatives and respecting cultural contexts. What we've achieved here, she explained, is not an end point, but the beginning of a new approach to our work in the region. Thompson nodded approvingly. You've done exceptional work, Johnson. Your methods have opened up new possibilities for how we operate. I think it's time we expanded this approach to other regions. As Amara packed her bags, preparing to return to Washington, she felt a mix of emotions. There was pride in what had been accomplished, hope for the future of this country and the region, but also a tinge of sadness at leaving. She had formed connections here, had seen firsthand the power of genuine engagement and understanding. On her last evening, Amara met with Farid for a final debrief. As they sat in a small cafe, the sounds of the city drifting in through the open windows, Farid smiled warmly at her. You have done more here than you know, Ms. Johnson, he said. You have shown that it is possible to bridge divides, to find common ground, even in the most difficult circumstances. Your legacy will live on in the work we continue to do. Amara felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. Thank you. Vari, I've learned so much here about this region, yes, but also about the universal human desire for dignity, for understanding. It's something I'll carry with me in all my future work. As her plane took off the next morning, Amara watched the landscape recede below her. The country she was leaving was still fragile, its future uncertain, but she left with a sense of hope, a belief in the power of dialogue, of cultural understanding, of patient, persistent engagement. Her phone buzzed with a message as the plane reached cruising altitude. It was from Karen. Welcome back, partner. Ready to change the world some more. Amara smiled as she typed her reply. Always, one mind at a time, remember? As the plane carried her back to Washington, back to the challenges and opportunities that awaited her at the CIA, Amara felt a renewed sense of purpose. The work she had done here, the lessons she had learned, would inform everything she did moving forward. She thought about that day in the coffee shop, the misunderstanding that had started it all, how far they had come since then, how much they had learned and grown, and yet, in many ways, the core of their work remained the same, building bridges, fostering understanding, changing minds and hearts. As she drifted off to sleep, lulled by the hum of the engines, Amara dreamed of a world where understanding replaced fear, where diversity was celebrated rather than feared, where conflicts were resolved through dialogue rather than violence. It was an ambitious dream, perhaps, but one worth striving for. And as the plane carried her homeward, Amara Johnson, CIA agent, peacemaker, bridge builder, slept peacefully, ready for whatever challenges the future might bring. Amara's return to Washington, D.C. was met with a flurry of activity. Her successful mission in the Middle East had not gone unnoticed, and she found herself thrust into a whirlwind of debriefings, strategy. The CIA was eager to capitalize on the positive outcomes of her approach, seeing it as a potential model for future operations in sensitive regions. As she sat in Director Thompson's office, delivering her final report on the mission, Amara could sense a shift in the atmosphere. The skepticism that had initially greeted her methods had been replaced by a cautious optimism. Johnson, Thompson said, leaning back in his chair, I have to admit, when you first proposed this community-centric approach, I had my doubts. But the results speak for themselves. You've opened doors that we thought were firmly closed. Amara nodded, feeling a mix of pride and humility. Thank you, sir. But it's important to remember that this is just the beginning. The relationships we've built, the trust we've established, it all needs to be maintained and nurtured. Thompson's expression grew serious. I couldn't agree more, which is why I'm proposing a significant expansion of your division. We want to implement your methods across all our major operational theaters. The implications of Thompson's words hit Amara like a wave. This was an opportunity to reshape the CIA's approach on a global scale, to truly integrate the principles of cultural understanding and community engagement into the heart of their operations. As she left the director's office, her mind racing with possibilities, Amara's phone buzzed with a message from Karen. "Saw you on the news. Looks like your mission was a success. Dinner tonight to celebrate?" Amara smiled, feeling a sudden pang of longing for the simpler days when her partnership with Karen was her primary focus. "Absolutely," she typed back. "I have so much to tell you." That evening, as they sat in their favorite restaurant, Amara found herself pouring out the details of her mission to Karen. She spoke of the challenges, the breakthroughs, the moments of connection that had reaffirmed her belief in their approach. Karen listened intently, her eyes shining with pride and excitement. "Amara," she said as the story wound down, "do you realize what you've accomplished? You've taken what we started with our diversity program and applied it to international diplomacy. You're changing the way one of the most powerful agencies in the world operates." Amara felt a flush of embarrassment at Karen's praise. "We're changing it," she corrected gently. "I couldn't have done any of this without the foundation we built together." As they continued to talk, their conversation turned to the future. Karen shared updates on the expansion of their diversity program, which was now being adopted by major corporations and government agencies around the world. "It's amazing," Karen mused, "how a single incident in a coffee shop led to all of this. We're reaching people we never thought possible, changing mindsets on a global scale." Amara nodded, feeling a sudden wave of emotion. "It's overwhelming sometimes," she admitted. "The responsibility, the potential impact of our work. How do we ensure that it continues to be used for good, that it doesn't get corrupted or misused?" Karen reached across the table, squeezing Amara's hand. "That's why we do this together," she said firmly. "We keep each other grounded, we remind each other of our core values, and we trust in the ripple effect of our work. Each mind we change, each bridge we build, it creates a wave of positive change." As they left the restaurant, stepping out into the cool Washington evening, Amara felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was challenging, but with allies like Karen, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The following weeks were a blur of activity as Amara worked to implement the expansion plans for her division. She assembled teams, developed training programs, and crafted guidelines for integrating community engagement strategies into CIA operations worldwide. One particularly challenging aspect was adapting their approach to vastly different cultural contexts. What worked in the Middle East might not be effective in Southeast Asia or Latin America. Amara found herself drawing on her network of contacts, consulting with cultural experts and local leaders to refine their methods for each region. During this process, Amara received an unexpected call from Jamal, the young man she had helped steer away from extremism years ago. He had gone on to become a community organizer, working to provide opportunities for at-risk youth in his neighborhood. "Ms. Johnson," Jamal's voice was warm with gratitude, "I heard about the work you're doing. I wanted to thank you again for what you did for me and to offer my help. I think my experiences could be valuable in your training programs." Amara felt a surge of pride and happiness at Jamal's words. This was the true measure of their work's success, the long-term impact on individual lives and community. "Jamal, that's wonderful," she replied enthusiastically. "I'd be honored. I think you could play a crucial role in helping us understand how to better engage with young people who might be vulnerable to extremist ideologies." As she incorporated Jamal's insights into their training materials, Amara reflected on the interconnectedness of their work. From that first confrontation with Karen to her missions abroad to Jamal's journey, it all formed a web of understanding and positive change. However, as the scope of their work expanded, new challenges emerged. Amara began to encounter resistance from certain factions within the government who viewed her methods as too soft, too time-consuming in a world that often demanded quick results. One particularly tense meeting with a group of senators left Amara feeling drained and frustrated. The senators had grilled her on the practicality of her approach, questioning whether community engagement could truly replace more traditional hardline tactics. As she vented her frustrations to Karen over the phone that evening, her partner offered a fresh perspective. "Amara," Karen said thoughtfully, "maybe we need to change our approach with these skeptics. Instead of just defending our methods, why don't we invite them to experience them firsthand?" Amara paused, intrigued by the idea. "What do you mean?" Well, Karen continued, warming to her theme, what if we organized a series of workshops for these officials? Not lectures, but interactive sessions where they can see the principles of cultural understanding and community engagement in action. The idea took root, growing and evolving as they discussed it. Over the next few weeks, Amara and Karen worked together to develop a comprehensive program designed to give policymakers and government officials a taste of their approach. They created simulations based on real-world scenarios, role-playing, exercises that put participants in the shoes of both CIA agents and members of the communities they were trying to engage. They brought in guest speakers, including former extremists like Jamal, who could speak to the effectiveness of community-based interventions. The first workshop was met with skepticism from many of the participants. Amara could see the doubt in their eyes, the barely concealed impatience of people who felt their time was being wasted. But as the day progressed, something began to shift. During a particularly intense role-playing scenario, Amara watched as a hardline senator, known for his aggressive stance on foreign policy, struggled to navigate a delicate negotiation with a simulated tribal leader. "This is impossible," the senator exclaimed in frustration. "How are we supposed to get anything done if we have to tiptoe around all these cultural sensitivities?" Amara saw an opportunity. "Senator," she said gently, "that feeling of frustration you're experiencing, that's exactly what our agents face in the field every day. And that's why these skills are so crucial. They're not about tiptoeing, they're about building genuine understanding and trust, which ultimately makes our job easier and more effective." The senator fell silent, a thoughtful look crossing his face. It wasn't a complete conversion, but it was a start, a crack in the armor of skepticism. As the workshops continued and word of their impact spread, Amara and Karen found themselves fielding requests from other government agencies, from foreign diplomats, even from corporate leaders looking to improve their global operations. Their work was expanding in ways they had never anticipated, reaching into realms far beyond the initial scope of their diversity program or Amara's CIA role. One evening, as they were preparing for a particularly high-profile workshop for United Nations peacekeeping officials, Karen turned to Amara with a bemused smile. "Did you ever imagine back in that coffee shop that we'd end up here, training world leaders in cultural understanding and conflict resolution?" Amara laughed, shaking her head. "Never in my wildest dreams. But you know what? As big as this has become, I still think the heart of our work remains the same. It's still about changing minds one at a time, about building bridges between people." Karen nodded, her expression growing serious. "That's what we always have to remember, no matter how big this gets. Every workshop, every training session, every operation, it all comes down to human connection, to fostering understanding between individuals." As they turned back to their preparation, Amara felt a deep sense of gratitude for her partnership with Karen. Together they balanced each other, kept each other grounded in the core principles of their work, even as its scope expanded beyond anything they had initially imagined. The UN workshop proved to be a turning point. The peacekeeping officials were deeply impressed by the practical applications of Amara and Karen's methods, seeing how they could be applied to defuse tensions. In conflict workshops, Amara found herself invited to consult on peacekeeping operations in several global hotspots. It was challenging work, requiring her to balance her CIA duties with these new responsibilities, but it was also deeply rewarding. During a mission to a war-torn region in Africa, Amara saw firsthand the impact of their approach. She watched as peacekeepers trained in cultural understanding and community engagement techniques were able to build trust with local leaders, paving the way for dialogue between conflicting factions. One afternoon, as she sat under the shade of a baobab tree with a group of village elders, listening to their concerns and hopes for their community, Amara felt a profound sense of purpose. This was why she had joined the CIA, why she had developed the diversity program with Karen, why she pushed through all the challenges and skepticism. It was about making a real difference in people's lives, about fostering peace and understanding in a world too often torn apart by conflict and misunderstanding. As the African mission drew to a close, Amara received news that both thrilled and daunted her. The United Nations, impressed by the success of their methods, was proposing the creation of a new division focused on cultural intelligence and community-based peacekeeping, and they wanted Amara to head it. The offer was tempting. It would allow her to expand her work on a truly global scale to implement her methods in some of the most challenging conflict zones in the world. But it would also mean leaving the CIA, stepping away from the agency that had been her home for so many years. Torn by the decision, Amara reached out to the two people whose opinions she valued most, Director Thompson and Karen. Thompson's response surprised her. Instead of trying to persuade her to stay with the CIA, he offered his full support. "Johnson," he said, his voice gruff with emotion, "you've done remarkable work here. You've changed the way we operate, made us better at what we do. But this UN offer, this is a chance to change the world on an even bigger scale. As much as I hate to lose you, I think you need to take it." Karen's reaction was equally supportive, but tinged with a hint of sadness. "Amara," she said softly, "this is an amazing opportunity. You'll be able to implement our methods in ways we never dreamed possible. But I have to admit, I'll miss working with you so closely." Amara felt a lump form in her throat. "Karen," she said, "this doesn't mean the end of our partnership. In fact, I'll need your help more than ever. The UN wants to implement our full program, including all the corporate and community aspects. I was hoping you'd consider coming on board as a co-director." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then Karen's voice came back, filled with excitement. "Are you serious? Amara, yes, of course, yes." As the reality of their new path settled in, Amara and Karen threw themselves into planning. They had a monumental task ahead of them, building a new UN division from the ground up, but they were energized by the challenge. Their last day at their respective jobs was bittersweet. Amara found herself getting emotional as she packed up. Her office at the CIA, remembering all the milestones and breakthroughs she had experienced there. But as she looked at the photos on her desk, images of the people she had helped, the communities she had engaged with, she felt a sense of excitement for the future. Karen, too, felt a mix of nostalgia and anticipation as she said goodbye to her corporate clients. The diversity program they had built had taken on a life of its own, continuing to grow and evolve even as she stepped away to join Amara at the UN. Their first day at the United Nations headquarters in New York was a whirlwind of introductions, briefings, and planning sessions. As they stood together, looking out over the East River from their new office, Amara turned to Karen with a smile. "You know," she said, "I keep thinking back to that day in the coffee shop. How different things could have turned out if we had let fear and misunderstanding drive us apart instead of bringing us together." Karen nodded, her eyes shining with emotion. "It's amazing how a single moment, a single decision can change everything. We've come so far since then, but in many ways, we're still doing exactly what we set out to do. We're changing the world, one mind at a time." As they turned back to their work, diving into the monumental task of shaping global peacekeeping, policy, Amara and Karen felt a deep sense of purpose. They knew the road ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles and setbacks, but they also knew that together they had the power to make a real difference, to foster understanding and peace in even the most troubled parts of the world. Their journey, which had begun with a misunderstanding in a little coffee shop, but at its heart, their mission remained the same: to build bridges, to foster understanding, to change minds and hearts. And as they embarked on this new chapter, Amara and Karen were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, confident in the power of their partnership and the transformative potential of their work. The United Nations headquarters buzzed with activity as Amara Johnson and Karen Whitman made their way through the familiar corridors. 5 years had passed since they'd taken on the challenge of creating and leading the UN's new division of cultural intelligence and community-based peacekeeping. Those years had been filled with triumphs, setbacks, and countless moments of growth and learning. As they entered the conference room for their annual review meeting, Amara couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in how far they'd come. The room was filled with representatives from various UN agencies, all eager to hear about the division's latest successes and future plans. "Good morning, everyone," Amara began, her voice confident and warm. "We're excited to share with you the progress we've made over the past year and our vision for the future." Karen stepped forward, clicking through to the first slide of their presentation. "As you can see, our community-based approach has led to a 40% 50% reduction in violent incidents in regions where our peacekeeping teams are active, but numbers only. Tell part of the story. The real impact is in the lives changed, the communities transformed. For the next hour, Amara and Karen took turns presenting case studies, sharing stories of successful interventions, and outlining their plans for expanding their programs. They spoke of the challenges they'd faced, the lessons they'd learned, and the innovative solutions they'd developed. One particularly poignant moment came when they shared a video testimonial from a village elder in a formerly conflict-ridden region of Central Africa. The elderly man, his face etched with the lines of a life lived through turmoil, spoke with tears in his eyes of how the UN peacekeepers, trained in Amara and Karen's methods, had helped broker peace between warring factions in his community. For the first time in my life, the elder said, his voice trembling with emotion, I believe my grandchildren will grow up knowing peace. These peacekeepers, they didn't come with guns and tanks. They came with open hearts and open minds. They listened to us, they understood our ways, and they helped us find our own path to reconciliation. As the video ended, Amara saw several of the hardened diplomats in the room discreetly wiping away tears. It was moments like these that reaffirmed the power and importance of their work. The meeting concluded with a standing ovation and a commitment from the UN leadership to further expand the division's resources and reach. As the room cleared, Amara and Karen found themselves alone, basking in the afterglow of a successful presentation. We did it, Karen said softly, a hint of wonder in her voice. Sometimes I still can't believe how far we've come. Amara nodded, her mind drifting back to the early days of their partnership. Remember when our biggest concern was implementing diversity training in a law firm? And now here we are, shaping global peacekeeping policy. Their moment of reflection was interrupted by a knock at the door. A young aide entered, looking slightly flustered. Miss Johnson, Miss Whitman, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an urgent situation developing. The Secretary General has requested your immediate presence in the crisis room. Exchanging a quick glance, Amara and Karen followed the aide through the winding corridors of the UN building. As they entered the crisis room, they were met with a scene of controlled chaos. Screens around the room displayed maps, news feeds, and data streams, while diplomats and analysts huddled in intense discussion. The Secretary General, a tall, distinguished woman named Dr. Amina Okafor, beckoned them over. Amara, Karen, thank you for coming so quickly. We have a situation that I believe requires your unique expertise. Dr. Okafor gestured to a large screen displaying a map of Southeast Asia. We've received intelligence about a potential coup in the nation of Sariland. The situation is extremely delicate. The country is at a crucial juncture in its transition to democracy, and this coup could plunge the region into chaos. Amara leaned in, studying the map intently. What do we know about the factions involved? That's where it gets complicated, Dr. Okafor replied. The potential coup leaders are a mix of military hardliners and ultra-nationalist civilian groups. They're playing on ethnic tensions and economic grievances to build support. But there's also a strong pro-democracy movement, particularly among the younger generation and minority communities. Karen, who had been quickly scanning through the ethnic dynamics here, are incredibly complex. We're looking at multiple linguistic and religious groups, each with their own historical grievances and aspirations. Dr. Okafor nodded gravely. Exactly. That's why we need your help. Your methods of community engagement and cultural intelligence could be crucial in preventing this situation from escalating into full-blown civil war. Amara and Karen exchanged a look, years of partnership allowing them to communicate. Volumes in a single glance. They both recognized the enormity of the challenge before them, but also the potential impact their intervention could have. We'll need to assemble a team, Amara said, her mind already racing with plans. People with deep knowledge of the region's history and culture, as well as expertise in conflict resolution and community organizing. Karen nodded in agreement, and we'll need to establish contact with key leaders from all factions, including the potential coup plotters. Understanding their motivations and grievances will be crucial. Dr. Okafor looked relieved. I knew I could count on you both. You'll have whatever resources you need, but time is of the essence. Our intelligence suggests the coup could be launched within the next 2 weeks. As they left the crisis room, Amara and Karen were already deep in planning mode. They had faced challenging situations before, but the stakes here were higher than ever. The fate of an entire nation and potentially the stability of the region hung in the balance. Over the next few days, Amara and Karen worked tirelessly to prepare for their mission to Sariland. They assembled a diverse team of experts, pored over cultural and historical briefings, and developed a multifaceted strategy for engagement. As they boarded the UN plane that would take them to Sariland's capital, Amara felt a familiar mix of anticipation and apprehension. She glanced at Karen, seeing her own emotions mirrored in her partner's face. "Ready for this?" Amara asked softly. Karen gave a determined nod. "As ready as we'll ever be. Whatever happens, we face it together." The flight was long, giving them time to refine their plans and brief their team. As they began their descent into Sariland, Amara looked out the window at the lush, tropical landscape below. It was hard to reconcile the beauty of the scenery with the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. Their first few days in the capital were a whirlwind of meetings and negotiations. Amara and Karen split up, each taking on different factions and community groups. They listened more than they spoke, seeking to understand the deep-rooted issues that had led to this crisis. Amara found herself in a tense meeting with General Razak, one of the military leaders rumored to be behind the coup plot. The general was a stern, imposing figure, his uniform adorned with medals from past conflicts. "Ms. Johnson," he said, his voice gruff, "I respect the UN's concern, but you must understand, our nation is at a crossroads. The current government is weak, corrupt. They're selling out our resources to foreign interests, ignoring the needs of our people. Sometimes strong action is necessary for the greater good." Amara listened carefully, noting not just the general's words, but the passion behind them. She recognized the familiar rhetoric of would-be strongmen, but also sensed a genuine concern for his country's future. "I understand your frustration, General," she replied carefully, "but consider this. Coups often lead to cycles of violence and instability that can last for generations. Is that really the legacy you want to leave for your children and grandchildren?" The general's stern expression faltered for a moment, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. It wasn't much, but it was a start, an opening that Amara knew she could work with. Meanwhile, Karen was meeting with leaders of the pro-democracy movement, a diverse group of students, civil society activists, and reformist politicians. Their energy and passion were palpable, but so was their fear of what a military takeover would mean for their dreams of a free and open society. "We've come so far," a young woman named Mei Lin told Karen, her eyes shining with a mix of determination and unshed tears. "We've tasted freedom. We've started to build a real democracy. We can't go back to military rule. We just can't." Karen felt a surge of empathy for Mei Lin and her compatriots. "Your courage is inspiring," she said warmly, "but courage alone isn't always enough. We need to find ways to bridge the divides in your society, to address the grievances that are fueling support for the coup plotter." As the days passed, Amara and Karen began to see patterns emerging, common threads that ran through the grievances of all factions: economic inequality, ethnic tensions, fears about rapid social change. All these factors were contributing to the current crisis. Into the night, they developed a comprehensive plan. It wasn't just about stopping the coup, they realized. It was about addressing the underlying issues that had brought the country to this point. Their proposal was ambitious, calling for a national dialogue process that would bring together representatives from all factions and communities. It included economic reforms to address inequality, protections for minority rights, and mechanisms for greater transparency and accountability. In government, presenting this plan to the various factions was a delicate process. Amara and Karen knew they were walking a tightrope, trying to offer enough to satisfy each group without alienating the others. The breakthrough came during a tense meeting with both pro-democracy leaders and military officials. As the discussion heated up, with both sides trading accusations and threats, Amara decided to take a risk. "Enough," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the argument. "Look around this room. Every person here loves their country, wants what's best for its future. You may disagree on methods, on priorities, but that fundamental truth remains. So instead of threatening each other, instead of plotting plotting coups or counter-coups. Why not work together to build the nation you all want to see? A hush fell over the room. Amara held her breath, wondering if she had overplayed her hand. Then slowly, one of the military officers nodded. "She's right," he said gruffly. "We're all patriots here. Maybe, just maybe, we can find a way forward. Together." It wasn't an immediate solution, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, Amara and Karen facilitated intense negotiations between the various factions. There were setbacks, moments when it seemed like everything might fall apart, but slowly, painstakingly, they helped the Sarilanders forge a path forward. The coup was averted. Instead, a transitional unity government was formed, with representatives from all major factions. It wasn't perfect, and there were still many challenges ahead, but it was a peaceful solution that gave the country a chance to address its problems through dialogue rather than violence. As Amara and Karen prepared to leave Sariland, they were overwhelmed by the gratitude of the people they had worked with. General Razak, the once stern military leader, approached them with tears in his eyes. "You've shown us another way," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "a way to love our country without resorting to force. I thank you doesn't seem enough." Maylin, the young pro-democracy activist, hugged them both fiercely. "You've given us hope," she said, "not just for democracy, but for a future where all Sarilanders can live together in peace." On the flight back to New York, Amara and Karen sat in contemplative silence, processing the intensity of the past weeks. Finally, Karen spoke. "You know," she said softly, "I keep thinking about that day in the coffee shop, how easily things could have gone wrong, how close we came to never knowing each other, never doing any of this work." Amara nodded, understanding exactly what Karen meant. It's amazing how a single moment can change everything, but that's what our work is all about, isn't it? Creating those moments of understanding, of connection that can change the course of lives, of nations. As the plane soared over the ocean, carrying them back to the UN headquarters and the next challenge that awaited them, Amara and Karen felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for each other, for the journey they had embarked on together, and for the opportunity to make a difference in the world. They knew that there would be more crises, more challenges ahead. The work of building understanding and peace was never truly finished, but they also knew that together they had the strength, the skills, and the commitment to face whatever came next. As the first glimmers of the New York skyline appeared on the horizon, Amara turned to Karen with a smile. "Ready for our next adventure, partner?" Karen grinned back, her eyes shining with determination and hope. "Always, one mind at a time, remember." And as the plane began its descent, Amara and Karen prepared themselves for whatever the future might hold, confident in the power of understanding, empathy, and human connection to change the world.